Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rewind episode number 7 for Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. My name is Marty Sleva. I'm joined by Darren Mooney, Jamate, and producer Eric. Jack is currently filming reshoots for Juror number 2, so that is why he's not here today. I know Jack is doing his civic duty currently, but the timing is perfect because, Jay, you're joining us today, and as you see, our main topic is the Rings of Power Season 2, which I would say among all of us, you are the Tolkien superfan so much as you said the Shards of Narsil?
Yeah, I have the Shattering of Narsil on my arm. I'm a big Tolkien head.
Is Lord of the Rings your favorite thing? It's always a question I ask people. Like, what's your favorite thing? I think Lost is my favorite thing. Do you have a favorite thing?
Potentially. I actually think Lord of the Rings might be...
Maybe Berserk, up there with Berserk.
Berserk, no, Labyrinth is my favorite thing.
Okay,
well,
Berserk is my second favorite thing. Yeah, I've got another tattoo of Labyrinth. And then I think Lord of the Rings is my third favorite thing, but it's up there. Like I own multiple copies of the books. I own some quite rare editions of the books.
But it's not quite one thing to rule them all. Then, unfortunately,
no, it's.
We just make 9 more rings
forged. Yeah, 3 more were forged.
I did have to siege a city to get some of these books, so you know it's a big thing. But yeah, I'm a big fan, and because of that, I have some opinions on Season 2 of Rings of Power.
We will find out in this episode. Does Rings of Power Season 2 enter your top 5 of things? Or is it just shy? Just outside looking in? Just almost in there? Almost in there.
In the tree line.
I love the vagary and yet specificity of that. It's like it's going to be a pool of things, but you can only have 5 of them.
You only have 5?
So it's like
Very
it's
true.
oxygen in there. Like it's like
no, like oxygen and food don't count. Like things.
Oxygen is a thing.
You know things.
What's your favorite thing, Darren? I mean, you wrote a book on the X-Files.
Yeah, Star Trek would have been the one back in the day. I don't know if it still is. But yeah, Star Trek would have been the default one back in the day.
Yeah. Turns out engaging with the fandom of something can sometimes sully your relationship with things.
Oh yes.
Also, there's just so much of it. Like it kind of dilutes like the purity of the thing. Like this is probably something to talk about with Jamate before. Like, how do you feel about Lord of the Rings being a franchise now? Like, because it was like just Tolkien's work, and now it is obviously we have the Rings of Power. We have the 2 Gollum movies, because there's got to be 2 Gollum movies, The Hunt for Gollum. And now we also have like the War of the Rohirrim coming out this November. Like, what is it like to live in a world where Lord of the Rings is like a franchise like Star Trek or Star Wars?
I don't like it because there's something about Tolkien. Well, one, it was the thing that got me into reading, which is like huge for me because I have dyslexia. So it was like a huge thing for me to actually fall in love with a book series. And the movies were foundational in me going to study film and TV because, you know, the special features, I watched them more than the movies themselves. But something about Tolkien, for me, reading it, and especially the Unfinished Tales and the Silmarillion and stuff like that, it feels like lore. It doesn't feel like a story or a book. It feels like I'm peering into history. And that's what Tolkien intended, right? He envisioned it as being a
the mythology for England, isn't it?
Proto-mythology for England. And to see something that, because of that, I view as very... This is going to sound sad. I view it as very sacred. Seeing it bastardized is painful, and I as someone who studied the making of films and understands it, I get why they're making a lot of the changes they are, but I don't like it. I don't like it.
Yeah, so, I think it'll be an interesting convo because, like, I know some of Darren's thoughts just purely we haven't talked about the show, but based on your columns, you've written your golems you've written on it. That
there are 2 golems.
There are two golems because you can't just have one. You got to split it in half. One each Christmas. And it was your most recent one that went up on Monday about how this isn't a story; it's a side quest, a series of side quests, and how it very much feels like every moment, especially in the back half of the season, which we'll get to. That'll be our main topic. But it feels like the Leo pointing meme of like, yeah, I remember that thing from the Peter Jackson movies. Why are we doing this?
There's a moment where one of the characters dresses the other as Lord of the Rings, as if you as an audience member are supposed to go, wait, I get it.
Yeah.
It finally clicked. Yeah.
It is precious, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
He literally does it. It will be the most precious thing in Middle Earth.
Yeah.
And you're like, how does he know that the word precious is the one to stress there? It's like,
Yeah.
See, I've got so many details, and we'll get into them later.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
for me, the kind of pressing point is Rings of Power Season 2 references so many things from the book series that only people who are obsessed with the books will recognize, but then reference them incorrectly, so those people would be upset. So who is this for? Right? Like, who is it for? I don't get it.
Weird, because I don't think I dislike it as much as you do, Jay. And there are parts of it I actually do enjoy. I think the production value is a step up from season 1. I think the pacing is a step up from season 1.
Agreed.
And I think a few of the performances, and I honestly, the choreography in the battle, I thought the siege battle was like, felt like a theatrical battle, to the point where I was like, well, this is just Helm's Deep, and then this is just
like right down to the white stone front of the horse being ridden through the narrow streets of this kind of like white thing. You're like, somebody recently watched Return of the King.
Yeah.
I should watch Return of the King.
Yeah, what if we just watch those 3 movies since they're red?
This better movie.
Yeah. But yeah, before we get to that, we have a couple of news items we want to touch on. And also I see well, you know what? Before we touch the news items, a bunch of super chats came in before we started. Ooh. So we'll hop on those really quick. Thank you to everyone watching live on YouTube right now, watching the VOD, listening on your podcast service of choice. Everyone who supports us over at places like Patreon helps keep the lights on, helps us keep doing weird experimental shit. We really appreciate you. Jombly right off the bat with a $10 dono. Thank you so much, Jombly. Gave us a fair chance as a generic fantasy show, but soon after just gave me whiplash, and then something click. I understood Rings of Power to be the greatest unintentional comedy of our generation. I don't think it's that. I think the more you like Lord of the Rings or the Tolkien books, the angrier you're going to get at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. My thing isn't anger. My thing is like more apathy at this. And I just think that there is so much good and better genre TV on right now that
100%
you your time with.
Not to jump into a discussion we might have later on, but this is the thing where I look at like Joker Folly Ado, and I'm like, there is actually something quite impressive about lighting $200 million on fire in the present climate. Because it's like, you look at something like Rings of Power and you're like, that could have made 20 Clint Eastwood Juror Number 2 movies. Yeah. Like, you could have spent that money doing literally anything else, and you're doing this. And to be clear, I don't hate it as much as Jamate does. I find myself mostly just zoning out during large portions of it, which is bad. I really do. I find myself zoning back in and then getting like pushed out of it. But like, yeah, you watch it and you're like, this is gorgeous. This is massively expensive. This costs you some money, involves incredibly talented people. Like, the production design is astounding. The scale is fantastic. The spectacle, I think, is amazing. But you're like, it's in service of a story that I don't understand why it is being told. Like, I don't understand why you are telling this story now in this world, outside of the fact that it allows you to reference a bunch of things that like millennials will recognize from, per Jamate's point, either the books or online posts about how Peter Jackson's films betrayed the books by not including elements that are in this show, or things that you recognize from the films themselves, even though Amazon don't own the copyright to them. So we have to kind of just vaguely allude to them. I don't know why outside of those reasons this exists, which is a very strange thing to say about a show this big and this expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I want to preface that I don't hate the show. I just think it's a bad adaptation, and I don't think that's necessarily their fault, because like you said, Darren, they don't have the rights to specific things. But what they have chosen to do, I just think is baffling. But yeah, I'm completely with you. I'm not sure why this show is the way it is. Like, it had the potential to be so much bigger, but it also feels as if they are just trying to set up pieces so we can have big set pieces like the drowning of Numenor, and the Siege of Eregion was the big one of this season, and we've heard so much about it. in the stories, and they're just trying to set up characters to be able to experience that, like Gil-galad and Elrond and Galadriel and stuff. Like they're quite passive in a lot of these situations, and they've given them motivations, which is positive, which is good. Like characters having motivations is good.
Yeah, particularly characters you're spending time with. Yeah, you're spending that much real estate on.
But they fall really flat because once they've done their big lore moment, they kind of just go back to being non-characters. Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of it.
I also like when characters leave for several episodes and then they pop up again. I'm like, I forgot you were on the show.
Well, like that is a
I literally forgot Gandalf was on the show for a while.
I think you mean Grand Elf.
Oh, I'm sorry, I mean Grand Elf.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. We will talk about Lord of the Rings later, but I do like that we're front loading. Sorry, Jermaine. I'm sorry.
Honestly, the Grand Elf stuff pisses me off so bad. Oh, actually, sorry. All of the Gandalf stuff pisses me off real bad. Like that's probably the bit that pisses me off the most.
I go to bat for Hold the Door. I think Hold the Door is dumb as shit, and it works on me every time I see it. R.I.P. Hodor. Purple Audacity with a $10 dono. Thank you so much, Purple Audacity. Mandatory, longtime listener, first-time caller comment. Thanks for all you do. Darren, I'm visiting Ireland for the first time. Any Dublin insights? Also, where do I find the cursed shop from Oddity? Darren, have you seen Oddity? Have we talked about Oddity?
Oddity's quite good. Oddity's like, and it's made. Have you seen Oddity, Marty?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it.
It's great. Like, and it's particularly like for a zero budget horror film.
Yeah,
it uses location really well. It does feel like it's like a bunch of people getting together on a weekend to make an Irish horror film.
I think it's the scariest mannequin ever. This is why you don't have statues, like weird little wooden statues of.
Putting on my list.
Yeah. It's really good. I wholeheartedly recommend it. And Ireland's had like a really good boom recently of horror films. I mean, you could argue things like Evil Dead Rise, which is directed by Lee Cronin, for example, but even more local stuff like Hole in the Ground, or like Hammer Horror tried to restart themselves with Wakewood, which is like, I believe, an Aidan Gillen horror film, if I'm remembering correctly. Aidan Gillen, Timothy Spall. I think it's very good. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, in terms of like recommendations for Dublin, if you're around, I mean, the big one is, if you can get into Kilmainham Gaol, and I say Gaol, it is actually a prison, but you should book a tour of Kilmainham Prison if you can. That is one of the best walking tours in Dublin. The tickets tend to go far ahead of time, so if you know when you're going to be there, try and book ahead of time. The other big one that I would recommend is the Little Museum of Dublin, which is on St. Stephen's Green. It's small, you'll do it in a couple of hours, but it's a really nice sampling of Irish culture that's a bit off the beaten path. And then outside that, like the Jameson Distillery, not to turn us into alcoholic tourism, but like the Guinness Brewery and the Jameson Distillery are also like really great locations in the capital as well. And just go out of a night and just have a night in Dublin would be what I'd recommend. Just kind of wander around. Yeah.
I love going to a new city and just getting a nice wander in. Especially booking a hotel, staying somewhere central that you could just like walk out of your hotel and be like, I'm just going to wander around for several hours.
Exactly what I did.
Yeah.
I went to Dublin. Great. Absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Foss with a £5 down. Thank you so much, Foss. Watched Transformers 1 on the weekend, and as a 21-year-old fan, it was everything I wanted and more. Can understand it being boring for some, though. I mostly liked Transformers 1. I am not, and that's speaking for someone who's not a Transformers fan. You weren't super hot on it, right, Darren?
I wasn't. I felt kind of like grumpy and old and out of touch. I mean, again, like I found it nice that it was a kids movie for kids that was designed to sell kids toys, as opposed to convince them to like join the US Army. I think that's a better space for Transformers to be in. But I did find myself just like, I was kind of, it's because it's from Josh Cooley, who directed like Toy Story 4. Mm-hmm. I think I was expecting something like Pixar or even like late DreamWorks adjacent. And I think what I got was something that's much more traditional children's movie in the mold of like the original Transformers movie. Mm-hmm. And it didn't connect with me the way that it did for some people. And honestly, I'm delighted. Like I was there with a bunch of fans on the night. They had a good time. I was left kind of cold, but it's always nice to be in a room full of people who are having a good time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing like deeply offensive, not offensive in a like this offended me way, but there's like nothing like you can really get mad at the movie. Like the worst is you can leave and just be like, well, I didn't really like it. I
want to say that I got corrected there in the comments. Goal is pronounced jail. Apologies in Irish. We don't have a J.
I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sure
that I live in Ireland, but yes,
because it would pop up that word popped up a bunch in Elden Ring. Every time you had to fight a dude in like in a weird dimension, and I was like, "What the fuck is this word? It's got a G and A and O and that," and they're like, "It's just jail." I'm like, "Oh, okay, well that makes sense."
Yeah, it's like the Scardu fragments. People always pronounce it.
It's like, "Oh no, it's just shadow." I'm like, why don't we just spell it shadow then? Make it easier for me.
No thanks.
Not to jump into like a discussion of Irish culture, there is that weird tension where like we will initially try to invent words for like words that we imported from like English, like computers. I think were reveras and stuff like that. But we will eventually, at certain stages, just call it a computer with an accent. Just say the word computer with an accent.
I mean, also language is always changing, so like pronunciations, I think I never really get too hung up on because like regional dialects might completely be different. Like there's several correct pronunciations of several words. Words are jazz.
And by the way, Sovereign is entirely correct to call me, and I'm not at all complaining or dunking on Sovereign. I should be able to say the word jail.
It's actually sovereign.
Good point. It is Sovereign.
A hard G to pronounce. Quintuple A with a file or dono. Thank you so much, Darren. Did I miss an episode of your personal pod, the 250 last weekend? I need my dose of Irish culture. Darren, where's the podcast?
You did not miss that episode, to be clear. That is an us error, not a you error. We are covering the Alien and Predator franchises, and we had a bunch of scheduling conflict. Yeah, it's great. And we managed to convince some like people who are far too qualified to be on our podcast to be on our podcast. So Emmett Kerwin, who is like an Irish playwright, Irish actor, Irish film writer, he wrote like Dublin Old School and starred in Dublin Old School. Awesome. He came on to talk about like Predator 2, and we weren't able to make the date line up. We had like a last minute cancellation because he had to do a charity book read. And I was like, screw those kids. You agreed to be on the podcast. I can't do it. So we had to reschedule, and it should be out this weekend.
Sorry, for a second, I thought you said Emma Corrin, and I was like, Emma Corrin is just on your podcast talking about Predator? That's what when you said that, my eyes were like, what? And then you're like, okay, no. This is another person.
Yeah, no, I was surprised. Like, Emmett is great. I love Emmett very much. Yeah. He's a really wonderful director, but I love that you were like, Emmett Kerwin.
I was just like, that's a weird get. She's then Deadpool. There you go. And then Bookworm 776 with a $5 dono. Thank you so much. Lord of the Rings were the last books I had read out loud to me by my dad before I read fully independently at bedtime. So they'll always have a special place to me. That's really nice.
Yeah, but that was
what did you? I came to the books after the movie. I saw Fellowship of the Ring, and I was like, this movie's sick as hell. And then I read the 3 books and The Hobbit that spring, I think, after Fellowship.
I was bribed. I was obsessed with the movie.
It's always a good way to make kids read, honestly.
Especially me, who has always really struggled. Like, reading for me is a chore because I have dyslexia, so it's like it's difficult. So it's not a fun time. I have to read paragraphs multiple times to fully contextualize them and stuff if it's heavy, and Tolkien is heavy. So when I was obsessed with the movies, and my mum said, if you read a chapter of The Hobbit every week, you'll have your pocket money. Like, you'll get your allowance, basically. So I blasted through The Hobbit and ended up just loving it because I felt like I was discovering more about the movies I loved and the world that I loved. And then when I was like, oh my God, look how much more there is. That's when I just snowballed into, falling into that world. So it was bribery for me.
Yeah. I never felt after that. I never felt the urge to like do the Silmarillion or any of the, or I think I might have tried some of it, and I'm like, oh, this is just a history book.
Yeah, you don't need to read the Silmarillion.
I feel like once you get to that point, you're like, I'm making a choice whether to like fully invest in this thing or like stay sort of at like an arm's reach fandom.
Is this one of my 3 favorite things?
Is it one of my things?
No.
Yeah. Am I going to read this like God. I read that shitty fake book from Lost that was like, here's the manuscript of someone who crashed on the island. I believe it was called The Bad Sister. Bad Twin. It was called Bad Twin. There was a book that didn't have anything to do with Lost except for the fact that the book was supposedly written by someone who died in Flight 815, and there were supposed to be clues in it, and let me tell you, there weren't. They just got me to read a very shitty mystery book. So
obfuscation.
Somebody on the production team had an unpublished manuscript. They were like, the easiest way to get this on the New York Times bestseller list.
But lost on it.
To get fucking moops like Marty doing it. And it worked. Really quick before we go whole hog into Rings of Power talk, I want to talk about two things. One is casting news of Lanterns. Speaking of genre TV, an upcoming. This is DC. What's the James Gunn's brand called now? DC Studios. Is that like? This is officially under the umbrella of James Gunn's thing. Unlike Joker Folia Dude, this is going to be under the new DC. Lanterns, which is going to be the upcoming Green Lanterns HBO series that is being pitched as a True Detective-esque, sort of like a dark murder mystery set in the American heartland, has found its pair of Green Lanterns. Jon Stewart being played by Aaron Pierre, who was just lead in Rebel Ridge, that we talked about and really enjoyed from a few weeks back, and Kyle Chandler as Hal Jordan. So this is almost, again, like True Detective, going to be sort of like a buddy cop of like two separate Green Lanterns solving cosmic crimes on Earth. I don't know anything about Green Lantern. I know it's got rings. I know there's multiple of them. Sometimes they're aliens, and I know I think they hate yellow. That's like the most I know about Green Lantern.
Yeah, the Green Lantern stuff is there. Obviously, again, nice tie into Tolkien and Rings Power, but they were inspired by Wagner's The Ring Cycle, I believe, which Tolkien was officially not influenced by The Ring Cycle. I think his argument is that they both have rings in it, and that's the extent of the similarities between the two. But basically, like the Green Lantern is a character who can like generate constructs using their ring. It was originally like Alan Scott, and then in the 60s it was reinvented like in the Silver Age, in the same way that you got your Silver Age Flash, you got your Silver Age Green Lantern, and it was like, again, 1950s gee whiz science fiction concept. So now it's no longer a guy who finds a railway lantern, it is a space cop. And the idea is you have this space cop who everybody patrols their own sector of space. You get a ring. That ring allows you to construct whatever's in your mind. It's usually like a big fist because, you know, there's only so many ideas that comic book writers have. But basically, the Green Lantern was always kind of like a secondary kind of joke character because, as you said, the Green Lantern's fatal weakness for most of the classic run was the color yellow. Like, the character could not affect anything that was the color yellow. So there were, like, again, as somebody who read a lot of the Silver Age comics, there were a lot of like, oh no, the villain has a yellow rocket launcher. And it's like, how are the Green Lantern boys gonna get out of this one? But it did actually, to be fair to it, it had a really good reinvention around about the early 2000s under writer Jeff Johns, the Rebirth brand, where he basically like fashioned it into what is effectively like DC's Star Wars, where he came up with this concept of like, well, what if there's a yellow lantern or an orange lantern or a violet lantern or whatever, and like just fashioning this kind of mythos that really intense, really fascinating, and like was kind of the basis for the movie of which we do not speak. But like for a lot of like comic book fans of my age, the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run was an activation point. So that like the Green Lantern has like a place in modern comic book fandom in large part due to that. I am very fascinated by this idea of like doing True Detective but with Green Lantern because like the thing about like the Penguin, which is great, is the Penguin is what if the Sopranos with the Penguin, and that worked out pretty well. So I'm like, what if True Detective with Green Lantern? I'm like, that sounds like the premise that worked really well and is working really well on TV right now. So yeah, hit me.
And one of the lead writers is Damon Lindelof, going back to Lost, who's when he's delved into comics before, he gave us Watchmen, which was phenomenal. So great.
Yeah, but he also wrote that manuscript, dude. So
yeah, I think he also wrote Cowboys and Aliens, which we don't need to talk about that. There's no need to talk about Cowboys and Aliens in one movie
together.
One movie
where you can really sense the enthusiasm radiating off Harrison Ford. Like, you know, you can really just sense he's happy to be there watching that movie. And Daniel Craig, like two of the guys who are most happy doing this sort of stuff.
I'm just so happy to live in a world where for the next 6 months, people are going to be asking Harrison Ford about Red Hulk.
Oh my god!
He's already described himself as on a day trip to the MCU. Like he's already done. It's great. Like it's great. The movie's not coming out for another 6 months. It's like, yeah, no, I'm just here for the day. It's like, please stop asking me about this.
That's good stuff. But yeah, looking forward to
that. We changed the server to something closer to Europe because Darren is like cutting a few times. See if I can.
Sorry,
it's not your fault, Darren.
No, not your fault.
Can I keep talking? What are we?
No, give me 1 second because it will cut for a second.
We'll cut out.
Oh, okay. Technical difficulties. Sorry, folks. Blame Europe. Don't blame Jamaica. also resident of Europe.
Yeah.
Do we look good now?
Yep. Go
You
ahead.
think Darren's frozen, or is he just looking
We look
downward?
good.
No, I'm
Oh,
back. I'm back.
We look
Darren's
great. We look
fully
great.
back. Boom.
All right, we're back. Now we're talking about things, everyone. Everyone be good. The other thing I want to talk about before, Snake, you cannot blame me for being in the U.S. Granted, I am the only one in the U.S., so maybe we can blame me for being in the U.S.
Not long.
You can't. This is gonna be a rough. This is gonna be a rough next month for the U.S. Just don't blame me. Just have pity on your American friends for the next month. The other thing I want to talk about, not quite news, but this week, yesterday and today, a pair of pretty substantial movie anniversaries for movies that I would say, for especially our generations, really meant a lot. And I know both movies meant a lot to me growing up, and sort of when I started blossoming into someone who like watched movies more than just, oh man, Batman Forever, that was cool. Is October 14th, 1994. So the 30th anniversary yesterday of Pulp Fiction. And then October 15th, 1999, the 25th anniversary of Fight Club, which I know it's not original to say that those two movies, were fans if you came to them at a certain age. But, Pulp Fiction is one of those movies. I remember I had pneumonia in middle school, and my dad took me to the video store, and I think they had some rent 5 movies for $5 for 5 days or something. And I remember getting Pulp Fiction. It was my dad was a big movie guy, and I was like, I think for some reason, I don't know what sparked me wanting to be I want to watch adult movies or movies that aren't superhero movies or comedies or whatever. And so he picked out Casablanca, The Untouchables, Goodfellas, Scarface, and Pulp Fiction. And he gave me those 5 movies as a 12-year-old that just unlocked everything in me.
Wow.
What do you watch the next weekend?
That was the thing. I was just oh, this is what's going on here.
Now, Marty, it's time for Porky's and Porky's 2 the next day.
And it was just kind of incredible. And I remember them just being oh, movies can do this. And part of it was because I had a high fever, I think, from pneumonia, but the other part was just oh, this is phenomenal. And yeah, at 12 I was a good kid, though. I wasn't getting into fights or anything, so I think it was fine. I think my mom was at work all those days, so he was just watch them during the day and just put them away when she's not here. But yeah, Pulp Fiction.
Did you concoct a plan to take down the US government? Was there Project Mayhem?
Project Mayhem. No. Pulp Fiction was a little Fight Club was a little later.
Okay.
This would have been in 98. So that was when I first got Pulp Fiction. And then Fight Club to me was again, I don't think I saw it in theaters, but it was for probably a lot of people, it was a seminal DVD movie. When I got my first DVD player in the fall of 2000, I got a PlayStation 2, and that was our family's first DVD player. And I remember Fight Club and The Matrix, and whatever the most recent WrestleMania was. Those are my first 3 DVDs: WrestleMania 14, Fight Club, and The Matrix.
I have a memory of owning a DVD of Fight Club that came with a bar of soap.
Yeah. Yeah, we would have been in the same market. I would have got the same DVD.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't think that was a thing in the US. Bunch of dirty boys here.
I remember it vividly, the color of it.
Yeah.
What it tasted like.
I don't remember that, but okay.
It tasted like.
Yeah, that's why I am the way I am.
The liposuction clinic that the fat was
they harvested it from.
Yeah.
To your point and to Jamate's point, the thing is we're talking not just about moments of activation of cinema, the DVD, the idea of the DVD market being a thing. And Jamate mentioned the Lord of the Rings special editions. Those are basically film schools, or The Matrix, where you had the follow the white rabbit thing that would take you into the production of it and ask you to engage with it. And even Fincher's DVDs generally are packed full of special features that go through every aspect of the production, including how much he hates every single second of making Alien 3. But my memory of Fight Club is fascinating because it is you mentioned, it's almost the inverse of the moment that you mentioned, Marty, which is my family would, when we were growing up, would always make a point of Friday night or Saturday night, as the kids got older, they went out, but one night a weekend, we would all sit down and watch a movie together. And it would be a modern movie, it would be a recent movie, and we go down to the store, we pick it out. And sometimes Dad would pick, sometimes Mom would pick, sometimes we'd be allowed to pick. And I remember us watching Fight Club and my parents not getting it. It not being a movie that appeals to a middle class, at that stage 40 or 50 something Irish audience. but it activating something in me. And I remember that Christmas, my parents getting me the DVD of Fight Club. And it just being like a really thoughtful gesture. This movie that they personally hated with every fiber of their being, but we're like, this clearly connected with you, Darren, in a way that we're not alerting the authorities yet about, but in a way that we are a little bit concerned about, but we want to encourage. I just that is my big memory of Fight Club, is like my parents being like, this clearly means something to you and doesn't mean anything to us, and we are going to encourage it. And that just being magic, you know?
Yeah, and both these movies were like when my freshman year in college, like dorm room staples on what, like it was like posters of these two and The Big Lebowski. Like those are just bees. Yeah, exactly. Walk into any room. It's funny, of all those movies I mentioned, Scarface is the one that it probably like I just rarely revisit because I'm like,
I mean, that's the one Al Pacino won the Oscar for. That was the big interview this week, wasn't it? Where like Al Pacino was asked like, what movie do you think you deserved an Oscar for, if not Scent of a Woman? And like you're like, come on, Godfather 1, Godfather 2, even Godfather 3, and he's like, no, Scarface. That I really wanted the Academy to give me an Oscar for the movie where I shout, "This whole town's a pussy just waiting to get fucked."
I want that in the little reel beforehand.
Yeah. It's
like cut the Glenn Close in the audience clapping.
Yeah. Like, who else would it would have been? Like Jeff Bridges or something. Like, who are your other nominees? It's like, out of Africa. Yeah, it's like.
And then Pulp. I don't know if we've ever talked about Pulp Fiction on the show. I'm assuming, Darren, you're a fan.
I like it a lot. I mean, like, what a controversial take. Pulp Fiction, great, Darren says. But that activates American indie cinema, where obviously you'd had like Sex, Lies, and Videotape like beforehand. You had like the Soderbergh kind of breakout hit, and obviously you have the Weinsteins, who you have to unfortunately talk about when you talk about like American independent cinema in the 90s. But like Pulp Fiction is the moment where that independent American cinema really becomes vibrant and dynamic. I think it was the first indie film to earn over $100 million at the American box office. I may be wrong about that. But it did set some sort of record along those lines. And it is, as you said, a moment of activation, a realization that films can do this stuff, and films can do this stuff in a way that is accessible, popular, and that mainstream audiences will follow along. Because obviously, it doesn't invent any of the stuff it does, the non-linear narrative, the anthology format, any of that stuff is, Tarantino is a magpie drawing from a host of different sources, but he's synthesizing them into something that sounds insane if you look at like the early 90s in American pop cinema. Like Driving Miss Daisy wins the Best Picture Oscar, and you're like, okay, let's go see this movie about how there's a dude in a leather gimp suit in a basement. But somehow that becomes a movie that like the culture just kind of latches onto. And like, for better or worse, and I'm going to put my hands up and say, for better and for worse, Tarantino is a controversial figure. He is divisive. He is not everybody's cup of tea. But I think there is also something interesting in like, does Pulp Fiction create the last celebrity superstar director? And I know you can say Nolan is the obvious other example, but like the director that you would invite on a talk show to just have chat at you, where Tarantino becomes this celebrity who just does the rounds telling stories about the things that he loves, and where you can have him on like yapping about whatever. He doesn't have to be promoting his own movie even. You put him on a show and he becomes kind of like a public intellectual. It's a very strange way to describe somebody who's talking about like the Shaw brothers from Hong Kong. But he does become this kind of American public intellectual figure in a way that I don't think we've had since, if that's
and like you mentioned, Nolan seems to almost like go into hibernation in between movies, right? Like it felt like after the Oppenheimer run and the Oscars and everything, the awards season, that he kind of had, he goes to work, right? He goes and he starts writing his next thing, which is apparently going to star Matt Damon and is coming out in summer 26, right? Is that right, Darren? Darren's dead. Darren got so excited that I talked about Christopher Nolan that he just decided to leave the podcast. Whereas someone like Quentin Tarantino,
I'm sorry, back, baby.
Okay, you packed, baby. But so Nolan is like famously like after a movie kind of just turtles for a couple of years, and then he comes back out and he's like, "Look what I've created." Me and Matt Damon are going to make a possible Western. Is that like what some of the scuttlebutt is? Darren refuses to tell us what this movie is going to be about. No, sorry. Every time you start talking, Darren, you phase out for a little bit.
Darren has inside info.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
movie.
But yeah, remake of The Prisoner is the other one I've heard rumored.
Oh my God, could you imagine? But they just remade that with Jesus. You can't remake something once Jesus is in it. Shout out to Jim.
I
No,
think you
not
mean the
shout out
star-
to Jim Caviezel. Why did I just say shout out to Jim
Star of
Caviezel?
the Sound of Freedom. Yeah.
At least I didn't say friend of the show, Jim Caviezel. So that's
Yeah,
good.
very true.
I didn't say that.
We're training you out of that movie.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll call someone friend of the show by the end of the show. But yeah, you know what? HBD, Pulp Fiction, HBD, Fight Club, a couple good movies. Give them a watch. Where do either of them rank in your top 3 of their respective directors?
I think Pulp Fiction is in there.
I think Pulp Fiction. Yeah, Fight Club actually for me is probably bottom half of Fincher. Like,
Yeah.
I think just Fincher has made some like stone cold
Pure
master
volume, right? So it's
Yeah.
Gone Girl, it's Seven, it's Zodiac. Like
Social Network. I love.
So it's like
yeah.
it's certainly it'd be lucky to get into the top 5.
Yeah. I mean, Tarantino though, Glorious Bastards. If I could combine the Kill Bills, maybe that's a nice, easy cheat. Smuggle one in.
The whole bloody affair, yeah.
The Whole Bloody Affair. Yeah. Good movies. Okay. Before we move on to our main topic, Jewel Rao, €2 dono. Thank you so much, Jewel. Something. Money for support. You cuties. Ooh woo. That was beautiful. That was like a little haiku. But speaking of the only haiku I want to talk about, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, season 2. It's not called.
What a
Lord-
great
Is it
segue.
under the
Is it
podcast?
just called Rings of Power? Or is Lord of the Rings in the title? I actually don't know what the show's
No,
called.
I think it just
It's
says
called Rings of Power.
The Rings of Power. Yeah.
Rings of Power.
It does feel redundant to have the word rings in your title twice.
Just
Lord
a couple
of
of
the
rings,
Rings,
cut it up.
of Power. The ring-a-ning.
Just a
Ring-a-ding-ding.
couple of rings. Cut it up. Season
a
2
rinky-dink
has
adaptation, yeah.
a ringy dink. Season 2 has wrapped its 8-episode run. It was airing, I think it dropped its first 3 episodes and then aired weekly. I did not watch this week to week. In fact, I've watched them all in the past 72 hours. And I'm kind of happy for that. I'm not sure, as I'm generally a fan of the week to week experience of television, because in my mind, that is just what TV is. But I think this show might have worked a little bit better for me as a binge, because I think with a binge you tend to, again, for better or worse, I just forget. The stuff is just in and out, kind of. Like, I don't have time to really sit on and like think an episode, and so the good and the bad is just in and out. And so now when I think about the last 72 hours, I'm like, there's a couple things I liked. I thought it was cool when the shot turned from day into night, when it was reflecting Kellen Brimbore's the fantasy spell he was under, that everything was fine in his little kingdom, but it wasn't.
That was done practically as well, by the way.
I saw that, yeah, which I thought was really impressive, and I think we'll go into it. The Kellen Brimbore stuff might have been my favorite stuff of the season, or at least the most effective stuff. What I guess what did we think? It's top level. What did you think, Jay, of season 2? I guess what did you think of season 1, and what did you think of this season as a follow up to that?
Season 1, I gave it a pass because it had a lot of groundwork to lay. I don't think it did a very good job of it. I don't think the characterizations of its characters were very faithful, and as the opposite of that, it would have been fine to not be faithful if you're making something interesting, but they didn't. So I was like, they're laying the groundwork. Season 2, I'm going to give it a much, just try and fall into it, not be a lore nut and not really care. But the first few episodes, I was like, okay. And then I think we got to the bit where Gandalf is the Harfoots are in Rune, and they find the Hobbiton prophecy.
Oh yeah.
And I said, "Fuck off and die," and I turned it off.
And Alexa's like, we don't know how to process that. Would you like to restate your request?
I was so done. And then they just kept more and more things. They just kept putting in that are kind of just, even to the general audience, is just very derivative and offensive. Like having Hobbiton be a prophecy rather than it just being a quaint hidden village in the Shire, right? It's like, oh, yeah, there's lore, there's hills there that you can live in. oh, like under a hill, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Like, it's terrible. It's terrible writing.
It is
yeah.
Darren wrote about this, but it is like the Solo, the Star Wars movie, did the thing where it's like, I bet you wanted to know how he got his name Solo, or I bet you wanted to know how he got those dice that you never noticed until now. And you're like, well, I did not actually. I would like a cool story with a fun story with this character. It is that just constant throughout the second season. It is that moment in Alien Romulus where we were mad at where he says, get away from her, you bitch. And you're like, why are you doing this? It's that 10,000 times over.
It's a collection. It's basically a walk through a museum where it's like, did you ever wonder how Gandalf got his staff? No, not really. Well, here you are. And I'm like, do you ever wonder about the origin story of Aragorn's sword? And like, not really. They're like, well, here you are. Do you ever wonder why the Balrog is known as Durin's Bay? It's like, I didn't actually know it was called. Well, here you go. It's like, do you ever wonder why he's called Gandalf? It's like, I just figured that's his name. Like, my name is there. Here you go. And it just keeps like, even something like The Rings, where it's like, there is, and I think you're right. I think the Celebrimbor stuff is the best part of the season, in large part because I think Charles Edwards is great in the role.
Yeah.
And it's the one part of the show where there is a sense of tragedy to it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, that is also, collect these new 11 Lord of the Rings. You're going to hear a story about how each of them were forged in sequence. And it's like, I don't object to that. I think that's a perfectly reasonable structure to have on a show called The Rings of Power. But it really does feel like at the end of it, all I know is that the rings exist. It's like, I don't know what they mean or represent. I don't know why they're rings and not like, I don't know, necklaces or medallions or whatever. Yeah. It's just like, you recognize these things. So here is their origin story. And it's like, I don't need them to have origin stories. I need them to be important to the plot, and they are important to the plot of these 3 movies that I can watch anytime I like. It's very disconcerting.
The thing is everything they do with Celebrimbor and Anatar, Lord of Gifts and stuff like that is stuff that I was screaming for in the first season, because they made the Elven Rings in season 1, which is the last thing that Celebrimbor does. Like, and they did it first. And I
in
didn't
the finale,
like
incredibly compressed.
Yeah, like out of order. It was all grim. But I understood why they did that is because they needed to give Gil-galad, Elrond, and Galadriel stuff to do, because like they don't really do a lot in those stories. But like all of the stuff that I enjoyed and what it seems like you guys enjoyed is stuff that is faithful to the books. Like, and is just basically copying exactly what happens in those tales. And I don't know, I just think there's so much, and they put so much in, like with those references. Like, for example, I took so many notes on this, but I'm not even going to look at them. I'm just going to fire these from the hip. The Barrow-wights, which are something that Frodo and Co meet in the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. Elrond and his gang run into the Barrow-wights. They don't exist, like, in this story. They are sent. Those spirits are sent there by the Witch King of Angmar, who isn't alive.
Yeah.
And they're just like, oh yeah, a very small percentage of people who read the books will understand what Barrow-wights are. Let's put those in. And it's like, why are you?
But you're
doing
putting
this?
them in wrong. Yeah, but you're like you're putting them in, but you're not putting them in the way that they should be. Like, this is the thing with like the Tom Bombadil stuff, right? And I feel like we had this conversation earlier on about like your experience reading Lord of the Rings. And I think I've talked about this, where like I tried to take several runs at Lord of the Rings. It is a dense book to read, and I was like 10 at the time. And they spend so much time in the Shire. And like they spend so much time, and everyone keeps telling me, Darren, you got to go back. You got to get through the Shire, and then the adventure starts. So I go back, I power through the Shire. I'm like, I will get to the other end of the Shire, and then the actual adventuring will begin. And as soon as they get out of the Shire, they hit Tom Bombadil, this dude who just sings for pages upon pages, and then I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. And like when Peter Jackson is adapting Lord of the Rings to the screen, he makes a decision that is controversial to like the literal tens of people who care about Tom Bombadil. But he makes the pragmatic decision as an adaptation to go, well, Tom Bombadil, not in the movie. Like, it doesn't make sense. It'll slow the pacing of the movie down. It's a conceit that works in literature. It doesn't work on screen. And also, we need to get the audience on board with this concept, and we need to actually progress the plot in a linear way that works on a screen, even in the extended edition. And there is this weird vibe to Rings of Power where it feels like one of the primary purposes of Rings of Power is to take so much of the stuff that Jackson took out of the Lord of the Rings adaptations because they don't belong in like a theatrical cinematic adaptation that works as a story in its own right, and then just like plop them on a plate so you can go, here's more Lord of the Rings stuff from the Lord of the Rings books, without really thinking about how they work as elements of a story in their own right, if that makes sense. Like,
couldn't agree more. It's the complete opposite of how you do an adaptation. Peter Jackson, like Tom Bombadil is the perfect example. Tom Bombadil and the Barrow-wights and stuff like that do not propel Frodo and the Fellowship forward in the plot. So if you're dealing with 3 4-hour movies, it makes sense to remove the stuff that does not propel any of its characters forward, as much as some people like the Tom Bombadil singing and getting eaten by a tree and whatnot. Whereas Rings of Power, like you said, is they only have a certain amount of rights to specific references and certain parts of the Silmarillion and stuff like that. So it's like they've taken all of the potentially recognizable things and thought, right, well, you've got to find a way of fitting in the Shire into this season and the Barrow-wights and a Balrog. See, like, okay, so the Balrog's an example of the whole thing of waking up the Balrog and it turning into the Mines of Moria. Is that happens like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after like I think it happens in the Third Age or the end of the second, but it makes sense to give the dwarves a little bit of spice. And to be honest, everything with the dwarves I liked.
But the dwarves are great actors. Like, it's just good to spend time with those actors.
Yeah, that was just strong stuff in the first season. It was like the relationship with
the buddy comedy with Durin.
Yeah, with Elrond and Durin. Yeah,
and it's really nice. And like I really like that. And it's like they're referencing all the things that people are gonna like and recognize poorly, but not focusing on stuff that's actually interesting. So one example is racial stuff. There's a little bit of elf, dwarf, human kind of racial tension, but Elrond, who barely has anything to do ever, is a super interesting character because he's half human, and like his last name is half elven. Like he's half human, and that would be a really interesting plot point to have even elves be, slightly racist towards him, and there be tensions there, and succession and power and stuff like that, and he could use that as a way to communicate with the dwarves or humans. They don't mention it, and there's so many examples like that. So Gandalf is something that pisses me off massively that he's in this show. One, he shouldn't be here. He famously doesn't come in the Second Age. He said that he meets who I'm going to assume is Sauron in the East. Like, he meets that dark wizard.
They have said that's not Sauron, but like creators lie and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe they have. But if you believe that,
So that means he's a blue wizard.
Wait, you mean Saruman, not Sauron?
Oh, not Sauron. Sorry, Saruman.
Yeah,
sorry.
Sauron. Yeah, the Kieran Hines character, basically.
He looks a little bit like Saruman, right? Like he
looks and sounds like Saruman.
Also, like Saruman's whole thing is that like he's good until the start of like the First Lord.
You put the rocks on these little folk. That's not very nice.
Yeah, he's petty.
It's a big twist. Like it's a big twist in the Fellowship when Gandalf is like, "Well, let's all team up and fight Sauron," and Saruman's like, "No, we won't." It does feel like, if based on the show, Gandalf should be, well, I should have seen this coming.
Well, yeah, and it's like Gandalf isn't there in the Second Age. He very famously doesn't go to Rune. Like, he never goes to the East. He's based in the West. When he has to be convinced to go to Middle Earth because he thinks that he's not going to be powerful enough and he's too scared to fight Sauron. And then one of the Maiar basically says, and yes, that's why you need to go, because you feel that way. And that's why he's sent. And the fact that he's there and they're not utilizing the blue wizards, who are based in the East and are completely blank slates to do whatever you want with, right? Like, why aren't they using that? It's like, oh, but people recognize Gandalf, or Grandelf, which is
his name's Gandalf.
Huge fucking
please
insult.
Call him.
Like, hold the door, please. Yeah, hold the door, please.
Still a good moment. I'm gonna defend that one. Yeah, my I know from just reading some stuff and hearing other people talk that this the show takes things that take place over the course of dozens, hundreds, thousands of years, ages, and truncates them right into sort of the Forrest Gumpian thing of like, oh, everyone was around for the important stuff. All this is happening at the same time, which I on paper don't have a problem with if done correctly. I just do not think it is done correctly here.
Agreed.
Go ahead, Darren.
I was just going to ask, like, what is this about? Like, what is the Rings of Power about? Like, what is the show conceptually? Like a big argument. You're telling me I need to sit down and watch Amazon's The Rings of Power. What is it about? You know, like, what is the core of this story? And like, is it anything but you like Lord of the Rings, right? Like,
feel like what they wanted to do and either didn't failed at or didn't really go all in was to make Sauron sympathetic, was to make Sauron a Walter White, Tony Soprano, an anti-hero that you could be like, well, if I squint, I kind of see where they're coming from. Or even like Thanos. It's like, well, that's a lot of people you killed, but when you balance the knife on your finger, that was pretty neat.
Really also, like, you then have him turn into a literal pile of toxic black goo.
I was just about to say that.
Let me tell you, I fucking loved. I don't know what was going on there. I loved when he got to. First off, it was just a different actor. I'm like, did they just recast this dude? And then he gets absolute gooed.
Jack London.
Then he gets absolute gooed, and he's just like crawling through the snow, and like I'm like, oh, this is. Well, I don't know what was going on there. I was all aboard, and I'm like, well, give me more of the goo.
But like, I'm talking to people who are fans of like the books and like of Tolkien, and they're like, and then after that, Sauron has this like long, dark midnight of the soul, and he like tries to decide what he's doing next, and it's really compelling. And in the show, he's like 5 minutes, he chats with a dude, he's like, I'm going to conquer Middle Earth again, and you're like, that's okay, good for you.
The one good thing they got from that. Also, I agree, really hard to sympathize with someone when they turn into a pile of worms.
Oogie Boogie, famously, I was behind Oogie Boogie in Nightmare Before Christmas. And when I found out he was a potato sack full of worms, I was like, ooh.
I'm out. Like, there are some really cool things, right? I think as much as I don't really like the character of Adar and giving this weird conflict with the orcs, the Sauron being betrayed by being stabbed with his makeshift crown is so metal.
Upside down.
Yeah, that was sick as hell.
And then Sauron using it as a weapon.
Sword. Yeah.
Like, that stuff's awesome, and especially like as a lore nut, knowing that was once the crown of Morgoth's crown and housed this the Silmarils, like super cool. But there's lots of things that we just like. Adar doesn't really matter much. To the plot.
He holds up space until it's time for Sauron to get the orcs. That's
and Sauron's meant to be doing the siege of Eregion, but that's because all of the rings are made and he is sieging it because he wants them. And he's just like, give me the rings, right? Give me the rings, please. And I believe he's meant to have the one ring at that point as well. But
did any of the humanizing or sort of empathizing with orcs work on you guys that they tried to do?
Yes. But that's because in the books, and in like Tolkien's notes and Unfinished Tales, Tolkien does talk about the orcs not being irredeemable. They are not pure evil. They are corruptions, so there is always a chance for them to come back. And there's also mentions of, orc women and stuff like that. So they must breed.
I'm like with it up until this is the thing you mentioned. Like, the issue is the half measures thing, where like you can tell that there's a gem of an idea there, but there's also the sense that if they pull the pin out of the grenade, the fandom's going to go wild. So you can't have Sauron be too sympathetic. He has to be obviously evil, but will gesture towards Milton Satan or Walter White or Tony Soprano. And the thing with the orcs is like I love like that stuff in the like penultimate episode, the final episode, where Galadriel is watching them tend to their wounded and tend to their dead and seeing them take care of their children and realizing that these faceless monsters that she's been killing for generations are actually like people who have wants and desires and feelings and emotions. Does almost work on me, but then you get to like the climax of the episode and they just stab it down like, we're with evil now. And I'm like, you can't do it in the same episode. It's the same problem the first season has, where like the first season holds back on the reveal of like Sauron for so long that like the plot doesn't really start until the final episode because it can't start until you know who Sauron is. So then the final episode has to rush through. And by the way, I made a whole bunch of rings, and here they are. Here's the title of the show. Have a good day. See you next year. Bye. It's weird. It's very strange. Like there is this constant sense of like we have an idea, but following that idea would make the internet angry at us. And our bosses have said we're not allowed to do that this year. By the way, Galadriel's only going to be in like half the season. Don't worry about that.
The same thing with the guy who got the most screen time cut was Arendir, the other the elf ranger. Like that dude was barely in the show and he didn't do shit.
He got stabbed by Adar. Like there was a moment where I was like, is this a ranking level of like contractual immortality where like Adar gets to like properly skewer him in a sense of like we could write out the character if we wanted, and then he just gets to like lightly tap Elrond because obviously Elrond needs to hang around for Lord of the Rings. And I was like, okay, is this basically where we're at now? We're like any original character, just shimmy him out in the narrative. We're going for it's all Sauron, all Elrond, all the time.
He comes back, right? That was the thing that really got me in the first episode of the Siege of Eregion. That guy gets shanked by Adar. Yeah. And I do not care about that character at all because he's really boring. So when he got shanked, I went, oh, okay, cool. And then like looked back at my phone or whatever I was doing. I was on Slack or something. Thought he died. And then the next episode when they've all been captured. Yeah. And they're being held by the orcs. He was there. And I was like, aren't you meant to be dead? Fuck. And I was disappointed that he was alive.
Mason Gooding Jr. at the end of Scream 6 doing the thumbs up.
Thumbs up, yeah. Easy peasy. Well, he needed to be there so that we could end the season the exact same way the first season ended, where an event happens and they're like, but did you know you're actually in Mordor? Because the event happens, you're like, oh, but did you know you're actually in Rivendell when the camera cuts to it? And I'm like, sons of bitches.
Fuck's sake.
You ended it the same way you did before. 100% one of these seasons is going to end with them getting to the Shire, and the camera's going to flip around, and you're going to see the rolling hills and be like,
that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be Hobbiton. Like, that's the thing. Like, they've set up the prophecy. The final 100%. Episode is going to be, we're in Hobbiton.
I hate it.
I can't carry all these hobbits on my back. They weigh a hobbit ton.
God damn it. It's frustrating.
If that happens, you guys owe me a...
I will, yeah.
I will fly to Ireland if that's true. I will give you a bunch of money.
It's frustrating that the casting. I think the cast is by and large good. I don't think there's like I don't see a character where I'm like, ugh, like you're just flubbing this. Like bad scenes are generally the fault of the writing or just the lack of story propulsion for these characters. And the production design, I think, like I mentioned before, is pretty good. When a lot of it is mimicking what the foundation laid in the Jackson trilogy. But like I said, I thought the siege was well choreographed. Most of it took place during the day, which I know it's sad, but big battles like that, when they don't take place in the dead of night, I give you like a 1 point because I'm like, well, now at least I'm able to see what's going on. But it's just like you asked what the show is about. We spend so much time with Sauron and he has no motivation other than I just want to rule the world and make it evil. And I'm like, well, why don't you, what if you made me at a certain point and be like, oh, maybe he's got a point. Like, I just don't know what his point is.
Well, like, this is the thing. This is the thing that bugs me while I'm watching it. Is like every time you get to like, what is Sauron's motivation? What is Sauron's history? What is driving him? The answer is always, man, I was tortured by Morgoth. Like, my experience with Morgoth is what really changed me. My experience with Morgoth is what dictates my actions. And you're like, then why aren't you telling us that story? Like, if you want to tell Sauron's story, you can't have him keep going, okay, yes, I know this is a prequel to Lord of the Rings, but really the stuff that actually motivated me happened way before this, but we're not going to get into this. Like, every time he mentions Morgoth, I'm like, that feels like the show that you should be telling if you keep referencing it.
The Silmarils, like, the Silmarillion is what you should be doing. It's got so many cool moments in it. And like the thing is,
because they don't have the rights.
Yeah,
so we're going less goth.
There's
anyway, sorry.
There's so many moments that the show is trying to move towards because they are undeniably, unbelievably cool. So the example I'll use is the Drowning of Numenor. So if people don't want spoilers for what is going to happen, these books are very old. Stop listening
Also,
now.
you
I'll
called
give you
it the
a thumbs
drowning
up.
of Numenor. I feel like the hint is
Yeah,
in the
so
title.
the
But they've
drowning
seen
of
it in
Numenor.
prophecy like a million times. Like if a big wave
we've
doesn't
seen
hit the
prophecy.
city,
So
then you've lied to me.
they want to get to the drowning of Numenor. It's very important to Sauron's story. It's where he loses his ability to take a fair form and when he goes full evil and he starts to wear his suit and use his ring, right, and everything. And the way he corrupts the Numenorians, he goes from a prisoner of war to being the right hand of the king. Just through his words and how he manipulates people, and it is fascinating. And he turns the entire, island of Numenor into a cult, Morgoth cult worshipping like death cult. And
Wait,
they
is this
say,
going to
"Oh
happen, or is this already
no,
happening?
this is going to happen. This is going to happen."
Is the king the shitty dude?
Ar-Pharazôn.
The Farazard, yeah.
Does he become? Is he going to
yeah.
become like the main ring wraith?
He shouldn't, but
I mean, look at those eyebrows. I love that the show's
Look at his
like, you know,
eyebrows.
this guy's evil because look at his eyebrows.
He's got these
put
big pointy ones.
Put a cool filter on it where blacks become white and whites become black.
Yeah, there we
He's
go.
gonna look like a ring wraith.
Yeah.
But
And we're sharing them with Kieran Hines, by the way. When Kieran Hines comes on the show, they peel the eyebrows off and just swap. Sorry.
so the thing is like the drowning of Numenor is really interesting. They then send a fleet to go to Valinor to take over. And Eru Ilúvatar, God, goes, nah, mate, and takes a huge section of earth out from underneath, and everything drowns. And canonically, that's when the earth goes from being flat to being a sphere. And it was a flat earth, it's no longer. But anyway, Drowning of Numenor, super interesting story. But the problem is you have to get there, and a lot of stuff has to happen with Sauron for him to be able to get to that point. And also you have to have the relevant characters be within the lexicon of the viewer. So Ariandel and Isildur and that whole family and Farazon.
Yeah.
And to do that, they have to keep coming back to them. Like Isildur's story in this season is just like boring and inconsequential. He has a love interest who was a prisoner, and look, there are Ents. The Ent wives are here. There's a female Ent. Don't you remember that when Treebeard said all the Ent wives were gone? Well, here's one of them. Okay. Thanks for that reference that only a small amount of people would get. But they have to keep referencing these boring characters. Gil-galad being one of them, right? The High King. Super boring. He's just the king man. But they have to set him up because he has to fight Sauron at the battle, right? He's one of the people who kills him. And they're just trying to get to all of these different moments and having to spend time with all of these different characters, and even when they have nothing to do. And that just makes it so slow and like boring. Hence why they have to make all these references that just piss people off.
Does the plan for the show to run like until the prologue of Lord of the Rings, like
that's one of the moments
refusing to throw it in the fire? So that's ostensibly the end of. Is it a 4-season show, a 5-season show? Have they said? Do you know, Darren?
Well, they've said that it will run forever because it's a massive success, and the audience figures are pointing very strongly in directions they want them to go. So they've said like we will get a 3rd season anyway. I don't know if they have a target of like 5 or 6 or whatever.
They can't do all the stories in one more season.
They're going to have a time
4.
jump anyway, aren't they? Like there's going to have to be a time jump at some point, logically, right?
I could see the time jump happening in between now and the Numenorians coming over to effectively. Sauron becomes very powerful, starts terrorizing the elves, and is going to win, basically.
Yeah.
And then the Numenorians come with their fleet and their army, and it's infinitely more powerful than Sauron's, and they go. All of the orcs literally just run away. There's not really a battle. They just run away, and Sauron is captured. Drowning of Numenor. Sauron loses his form, has to go back. Then he starts getting super powerful and going crazy. And then everyone, the alliance of men and elves, have to fight. But yeah, there'll have to be a time jump because even after the Drowning of Numenor, because Gondor and Osgiliath and Minas Tirith all have to be founded. Yeah. For that to happen, right? So we're not going to see the founding of Gondor in the story. That's not going to happen. So yeah, it's weird. I don't know how they're going to do it, and I don't envy the writers because it's so dense. But I think there's a better way of doing it.
It's also it's hard not to compare it to its contemporaries on TV, right? It's hard not to compare it to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon.
House of the Dragon, yeah.
Yeah. And then when I was mentioning genre TV, that's almost one of those things. Is this was airing concurrently? The first season was airing concurrently with the first season of House of the Dragon, and like right afterwards was Andor, and right after that was The Last of Us, and I think somewhere around there was like Loki season 2, and it was just one of those where I was like, these are just fucking really good versions of the thing that they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And this, in comparison, is just, I don't know, oftentimes comes across as kind of like messy and schlocky. And like there's this whole, everything with Gandalf and the Harfoots and everything. I'm like, are they ever going to enter the main story? Like there was always with Game of Thrones, it was always like, well, half the episode takes place over east with but like characters are referring to each other. Like everyone in the capital are aware of this. Ooh, she's gaining power and she's got an army and she married Khal Drogo and she's got all of her horses, and like it seems like there's just knowledge of what's going on. Whereas like with this, like Gandalf is just gonna like get powerful and become a Deus Ex Machina at some point and just enter a battle.
He won't
like, is
be
that
involved in any of the main events of the story.
Why are they in the show then? Like,
because they're recognizable.
Exactly, Marty.
That's a different show.
Why is he in the show? Sorry. So
also I love, by the way, that the entire point of that subplot is to explain why Gandalf likes hobbits. Like you can't just assume Gandalf likes
just a
hobbits.
nice guy and
hobbits. He just
nice.
likes pipeweed and like hobbits are cool.
Like this is like prime like Back to the Future stuff where it's like, today you would have to explain why Marty McFly is friends with Doc Brown. It's like, no, the movie doesn't need that. I need them to be friends in order for the plot to work. I don't need like a 5-year prequel explaining why Doc Brown hangs out with Marty McFly.
Gandalf isn't going to interact with the main plot, and I'm willing to bet money on what is going to happen.
Okay.
In the last season, probably on the last episode, he is going to go see the elves. And they'll call him Mithrandir. And Kid and the Shipwright will give him the one of the rings of power, because that's what happens in the books. Gandalf has a ring of power, which is probably something that a lot of people don't realize. It's the ring of, I can't remember its name, but it's the ring of fire. It inspires courage and people trust him. He's going to get given that, and he's going to go, "Ooh, now I have a ring of power. Aren't I cool? Oh man, I love hobbits." And then the credits will roll, and I'll cry.
You know what I feel like would have been sick? So Galadriel is supposed to get all of those rings out of the city, and then she gets cornered by bad guys. Just put all those fuckers on. You got 10 fingers. Fucking wear all of those rings.
You love Green Lantern so much,
Turns
Marty.
into an armor set.
Literally all that like Green Lanterns do is just put on different rings.
Could you imagine if she was like, well, each one of these puppies gets a ring? That would be gnarly.
I love the idea of this turning into like a Western where it's like, now give us whatever you've got in the bag. And she just reaches in and then pulls out a hand with like 5 rings on them.
Just constantly reloading rings. Yeah.
Also, can we talk about the fact that Elrond and Galadriel kissed?
Yeah, right? I thought they were. I did not realize that they were like that.
No, it's because it's almost like they didn't write it.
Galadriel were more likely, right? As like a casual Lord of the Rings fan, it seems more likely that like Galadriel and Gandalf were a pairing, right?
Yeah, a little bit. But we're introducing Galadriel's husband next season, so it's very interesting to introduce.
Has he not been a character on the show yet?
No, he's not in the show yet. They're introducing him next season. It's very interesting.
That's exercising real elf control. Sorry, Jermaine.
God damn it.
That was so clean. That was better than the Grand Elf reveal, right? Like, which is impressive. I think it's very interesting to be like, oh, let's set up a weird love plot, because unless they were doing a friendly kiss, but the way it went to slow motion during the battle didn't really feel like it was a friendly kiss.
Platonic,
right?
Yeah.
But it was also he slipped through the brooch, so I don't know if like the kiss was
he slipped through the what, Marty?
That
was under the flame. I didn't see what they were doing
these days.
The brooch. Hey, he slipped at the brooch. So maybe that was a fake kiss to get all the Uruk hot and bothered.
Oh yeah. Also, so we've got to stop
just
the.
gathering around being like the one true ship is landing. Forget about the Numenarians. The one true ship has reached shore.
I just I don't get it. I'm gonna quickly look at my notes to see if there's anything else that pissed me off to the nth degree.
Please do.
Yeah, go for it.
Jay, are you still gonna watch? Are you gonna watch next season?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna hate watch the shit out of that.
I mean, that's a good question. So Sovereign, with a 10-year Dono earlier, said, got any opinion on the practice of hate watching? I see all this anger around shows like Rings of Power or Velma, and my usual reaction is just, don't watch it. Or is that just me being dismissive? I think there's a difference between people who are just like, I really don't have a vested interest in this, but I'm going to watch Velma to get angry.
Yeah.
Where, or someone like Jay, who is clearly a huge Tolkien and Lord of the Rings fan, watching this even if he isn't enjoying it.
It's tricky, right? So I used hate watching. I guess I used it as a strong term. There are aspects of both of these seasons that I enjoyed. I am watching them as someone who has an above average. I wouldn't say I'm a fucking expert or like obsessed. I have an above average knowledge of the Tolkien lore. Watching this, I find fascinating, not just as someone who studied and lived in film for so many years, but from a adaptation standpoint, I'm like, how are they going to do the time skips? That is fascinating to me. Like, how are you going to narratively get that across to an audience that doesn't have the knowledge that, say, I do? That's why I like watching this show, not because I think the stuff they're doing is interesting. I genuinely feel like I am learning from their successes in adaptations and also their failings. So
it's also fascinating to watch this from a business perspective of
the most expensive show in the history of television.
Yeah,
we're not talking about Citadel. Like, I love that they've released like Citadel Diane and Citadel Italy and Citadel India, and none of us are talking about it. The second most expensive show in the history of television. Sorry, Marty.
I can't believe every time I get a show. First off, Amazon, why are you showing me ads for something? I pay for Amazon. Why am I getting Citadel ads before this?
Somebody's got to watch Citadel.
Just a fascinating thing. Did you see anything else in your notes, Jay? That
I did, but I just completely forgot. Tom Bombadil, you did a great tweet about this, Darren. Your explanation of like the reveal of Tom Bombadil. Can you give our viewers a description of this?
Again, it's one of those prime like moments of like what modern pop culture is, where like, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while since I've seen it, I don't obsessively rewatch like the early second season of like the Rings of Power.
Yeah.
But like, obviously, the Stranger, as he's known, the character who is Grand Elf and hence Gandalf, meets this strange man, and he's trying to figure out who this guy is. He's played by Rory Kinnear, respected British television and film actor. And at one stage, he just like flat out asks the question, the $1 million question, who are you? The camera cuts to a low angle. It's Rory Kinnear leaning against a tree like he's Sean Connery's James Bond. The camera presses in on him as he explains, been a while since anybody called me much of anything. But back in, and I apologize, Jay, Wild with Time or somewhere like that, they used to call me Bobadil. Dramatic beat, camera presses in close on Rory Kinnear's face. Tom Bobadil. Hold for applause. It is one of the most brazen things I have ever seen, because it assumes that every audience member is like, that's Tom Bobadil! We've been waiting. The moment pop culture has been waiting for. Tom Bobadil is here.
There's only 5 people, right? And what pisses me off about Tom Bombadil, because I think he is the most egregious why are they here reference. So Tom Bombadil is introduced in Fellowship of the Ring by a tree effectively eating some of the hobbits, and then Tom Bombadil coming over and saying, fucking stop that, but in song. And then they chuck him back up, and then he sings for a bit. How are we introduced to Tom Bombadil here? Gandalf gets eaten by a tree, and Tom Bombadil comes over and says, you fucking stop that, but in rhyme. And he has now become this weird prophecy machine that helps wizards and is like all-knowing. And Tom Bombadil is a weird character because Tolkien famously never alluded to who Tom Bombadil was, or like what why he exists. There's loads of theories. One being that he is God, like he is the manifestation of Eru Iluvatar, or that he represents Tolkien himself, the author. because he says I was here the first acorn, like he was there at the creation of the world, right? So he's either God or Tolkien, and he doesn't help the plot. And Gandalf says at the council of Rivendell, oh yeah, we can't give Tom the ring because he'll just like, he doesn't care. He'll just like chuck it and he'll forget about it and he'll lose it, right? He doesn't care. He's very whimsical. He sings. But now they've turned him into like, I'm going to lead the wizards around Rune, which he's never been to, and lead them on this mystical quest to get their staff and like
teach important life lessons. Like the key thing is like he instills in Gandalf the virtue, where Gandalf at the end says, the real lesson I learned along the way was that friends are more important than the pursuit of power, perhaps even the rings of power.
Or like giving him direct quotes. Like he says a quote of like, there's in the Mines of Moria, Frodo says, we should kill Gollum.
Oh, yeah.
Like we should just kill him. And he says, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like, who are you to deal that out? Some deserve death, some deserve to live. And then
some who deserve life get death, and some who death get
who
life,
are you? Who are you to dole that out, basically? And Tom Bombadil says this to Gandalf, and I'm like, oh, so he's just parroting shit.
Gandalf's just cribbing hot bars from Tom Bombadil. He says, listen, 1,000 years from now, I'm going to use this when we're lost in an intersection.
There are so many moments in this season that are just like referencing lines from Lord of the Rings of different characters. Yeah. There's the moment where Durin says, and so it begins the great tale of our age. And that's like, that's just Gandalf's feck, and so it begins the great battle of our time. Yeah. Like, there are so many of those where it's like, I think Jay mentioned it, like characters in the Rings of Power have clearly watched Peter Jackson's like Lord of the Rings trilogy, be like, I'll take that. That's a good one. That'll be
that was a good one. That was
well, we're allowed to reference this. Let's do that.
Yeah,
let's have someone
copyright the word precious. We can use that. The two Bombadil things that stuck out to me. One, I like that he's got like an invisible wife. I don't know what's going on there. There's like one scene where like Gandalf's taking a bath and he hears his wife. He's like, "Where's your wife?" He's like, "I don't have a wife." I'm like, well, "What was going on there then?" And then two, I genuinely
Grant like heretic reveal where like he invites the two women in. It's like, my wife is in the kitchen cooking blueberry pie.
And then they see it's candle. You're like, "Oh, that's not pie at all." And then I did enjoy their last moment together, where it's like, "Listen, this is going to be the first step of your training. Let's just sit down, get very high, and look at the fire, and we'll sing a song." I'm like, "Oh, that's nice." I like that. That seemed nice for Grandel.
Because this is what it needs to be. This is probably me speaking from a lore perspective. That bit, I agree, was really entertaining. And again, that is what Tom Bombadil is like in the books, and that's why he's so interesting. He picks up the ring and puts it on, and it doesn't make him go invisible, and he's not attracted to it at all, and he tosses it away like it's nothing. That is interesting because the book spends so long telling you how powerful the ring is, right? Mm-hmm. And it means nothing to him. You flip that into an adaptation where we've only spent half an hour in Hobbiton and setting up the ring. We now meet a character that doesn't give a shit about the ring. That completely destroys everything, right?
Sure, yeah.
But to a general audience, if Gandalf met this weirdo in Rune, and we were with him for like a few episodes, and all he did was sing and smoke and eat, I would love it. Like every second of that, I would be like bawling my eyes out with like happiness. But my mum watching it would be like, "What are we doing here? Like, why is this happening?" But ironically, that's how I feel about the other half of the fucking show. So it's you can't win. You literally can't win for either.
Yeah. This is a show that I'm going to memory hole by the time season 3 comes along. I had to watch one of those like Screen Crush recaps in 20 minutes of the first season because I was like, I don't remember any of these fucking people. I absolutely don't remember.
You know, like it looked really impressive. Like Doom got an origin story.
It was wild how many characters I didn't remember being in the show until I watched that recap, and I was like, okay, no, I remember these. I think I watched every episode of season 1 twice. Like. And nothing stuck
to like Wikipediaing at several points to like be like, oh, that's who that person is.
Yeah,
like that's the thing with like Numenor, where like it feels like Numenor kind of should be the engine of the show. Like we talk about like the question of like what is this show about, and the closest thing it comes to being about something is about this like idea of a paradise descending into like chaos and anarchy and totalitarianism. And like, again, this is not an original parallel. Like Tolkien, obviously, he's talked about how he like cordially dislikes allegory and all this sort of stuff. But you do have like, before the show was even announced, people like writing Tolkien nerds who are like, like West Wing nerds, but for Tolkien, were like, Numenor feels like a parable for the state of like modern America or the state of like the modern West. It's this like idea of like a culture in decadence and in decline that is like succumbing to its worst impulses. And I'm like, could that be the heart of the show? Like, could that be what the show is about? And like, it does feel like that is what it kind of should be about. But every time we're in Numenor, A, I'm really bored. B, I can tell the writers are really bored. And C, I can tell that they're also just literally setting up the guy whose job it is to hold the ring over Mount Doom and say, no, I won't destroy it in the season finale,
Yeah. It's, I think I said this because we were on a pod talking about season 1. And I think I suggested this then, and I'm going to suggest it again. This will never happen because we can't go back in time. This should have been a show about the elves, and it should have been time skipping nearly every episode. Like, and we should have been seeing generations of humans, like, and generations of Numenor, because it does take place over thousands of years, this story, right? So the elves don't age. That's a beautiful narrative thing, because you follow those characters through those ages.
Yeah.
Everything is spaced out, and everything requires spacing, right? The fall of Numenor, the founding of Gondor, the interpersonal relationships between the dwarves, even Durin's Bane, right? The Balrog.
Yeah.
These are things that can take place over thousands of years. One, we've never seen a show like that time skips to that scale and has the narrative to be able to do that. It would allow us to still follow characters narratively through these ages because of the elves. But still hit these beats a lot quicker, right? And just get to them sooner. And maybe you'd have one less season, but I think you'd have a much more cohesive narrative, and there'd be far fewer like lulls in character development. And like you said, Numenor just feels completely boring. Why are we here? Why are we still coming back here? It's just boring. So that's my suggestion of what I think they should have done, but that might be a lot for general audiences.
But then we wouldn't have got Grandalf.
Oh, fuck off.
Also, why didn't he call himself Grandalf then? They keep calling him Grandalf.
Well,
and he's like, my name will be Gandalf. I'm like, well, why not Grandalf?
He doesn't like the hard ore.
I mean, that's
doesn't like the hard ore, yeah.
Good thing not to like.
It's not even the hobbits that name him. It's humans, and it doesn't mean big elf. It means elf with the stick.
You know what names can then have multiple meanings? J can be a bird, and J can be a letter of the alphabet. Think about that.
And J can be a pedantic Tolkien fan as well.
The token Tolkien fan.
The Tolkien fan. Beautiful. I think that concludes our every 2-year roundup of Rings of Power. We back in 2026 talking about season 3.
Wait. I'm probably making exactly the same complaints because we memory hold like this. This is the thing about binge watching. You watch it and it just pours out the back of your skull. It goes in through the eyes and out through whatever other hole you have. Head.
Well, I'm assuming did you binge watch or did you not, Darren?
I watched the first 3 episodes when they premiered, and then I watched the 4th episode, and I think the 4th episode is the moment where they have the folks used to call me Bobadil, and I'm like, fuck this show. And then we get on to like Jay's coming on. He's the Tolkien expert. We should be polite and be able to talk about like
we should watch the show.
Yeah, so I was like, I kind of have to watch it, and I watched the final like 4 days together.
I had the opposite because I know Marty, you binged, right? Yeah, and you like half binged, right? So Darren. So I didn't. I watched every episode week to week. We get to see a little bit of Isildur having an interpersonal relationship and seeing an Ent and Gandalf farts in Rune, and that's an entire episode. And I'm like, what is happening? And then I have to wait a week, and then it's like, oh, Galadriel has a ring, and Elrond doesn't like that. Oh, by the way, Numenor exists. Episode ends. And I'm like, what is happening? Siege of, the Siege of, why have I forgotten the name of the city?
Oregano.
The Siege of Oregano.
I didn't know the name of the city. Every time they said it, I was like, sounds like oregano.
Pretty cool. Did you guys? I don't know if this is just because I'm used to like the scale of Return of the King or like Helm's Deep or stuff like that. But like, I did like the set piece of the Siege of Eregion. But whenever they showed like the armies or like the battles, it just looked like a few people LARPing, rather than like armies of people clashing.
What this was my thing. Like Marty said, like Marty said this looks better than the first season, and I think like it is close. I think it's also like this is obviously moved from like New Zealand to England. Yeah, to England, so because it was cheaper and because it allowed them more control over the production. But like I also did feel a little bit towards the battle that like there were shots where they had dozens of orcs around, right? There were clearly like shots, but there were also moments that were like, we have 6 guys and we're going to CGI a background. There's a moment where like Celebrimbor is running around the kind of stockades at the top, and it really does feel like you're backing kind of like 1980s BBC production, but with a screensaver in the background.
Yeah.
It was and again, I'm not complaining. I don't need, like, this is the thing. Maybe I'm a bad audience member because I can be like, I would happily watch a 1980s BBC adaptation of this that looked really cheap as long as the material was good. I don't need the scale and spectacle. I don't mind that it looks like there were a total of 8 people on set for the epic battle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there were money shots, but I think that they didn't have like the blank check that they had during the first season, so they had to like carefully apportion it. Where they're like, okay, we're gonna crucify a giant troll now, so that's the money shot.
Why did they introduce that troll in like episode 1? Not show him for like the entire season and have him die in like 2 minutes. I'm like,
and also like his arrival is treated like it's a big deal, and he's killed off in like 2 minutes because obviously like the special effects budget only goes so far.
They should have got rid of Adar and just had Sauron have beef with this troll who just doesn't want to listen to him. That would have been way more fun.
I like, and then you have a nice contrast between like Durin and Elrond. So you have like Sauron and his like giant.
Yeah.
More racism in my fantasy shows, please.
Zarthur, thank you so much for the dono. A hobbit ton of money for that line after taxes and conversion. A hobbit ton of money. And Zarthur with another dono. Thank you so much. Fun fact: the Magic the Gathering Lord of the Rings set has a Tom Bombadil card, who's a god, just a subtype of card, and whose whole deal is interacting with sagas and chanting them. Look at that.
Yeah.
A little Bombadil. Well, that's a little Bombadil fact for you all. What's going on with his wife, though? Did he kill his wife? Is she like under the floorboards?
She's like buried. That's why Tom Bombadil can't get into the rings thing. It's like people are going to start asking questions about my background that I can't answer.
Yeah, I'm not. Goldberry is his name of his wife. I'm not sure.
Oh, he does have a wife.
Yeah, he has a wife. She's in Lord of the Rings.
Goldberry has like real Rosebud energy to it when it comes to nicknames, though. Like it's like yeah.
Goldberry.
You know how she got that name? She ate a bunch of golden berries. I like that characters get their names, like how George W. Bush famously would give people nicknames. Like someone had a pot pie for lunch once, and for the next 8 years, he just referred to him as pot pie. So that's how it works. Yeah, Grand Elf.
Maybe this show is about something then. Maybe this show is about like what if the second age of Middle Earth was the Bush administration.
Exactly. Yeah, Numenor. It's all coming together.
I also like, if I'm not mistaken, this show season 2 filmed during the writer's strike last year.
That
and
makes a lot of sense.
Famously wasn't able to have writers on set. So I like the idea that like the Grand Elf thing was just like a fucking put in there and we'll fix it. We'll fix this on set. Don't worry. And then they got the writer's strike happened. Like, well, we just got to film it as is. We can't fix anything. We gotta just.
As much as I hate the Grand Elf thing, I do like that they haven't been even more derivative in the sense of someone who wasn't an elf didn't call him Mithrandir, which is what the elves call Gandalf. And like that would be how they reveal that he is Gandalf. They just have someone call him Big Elf.
Yeah.
Jay, there is plenty of time. There's like 3 more seasons.
It's
for that
coming.
to happen.
It's coming. Final episode.
I genuinely love the Grand Elf thing. I think it is so dumb. And if something is that dumb, I'm like, I
it gets a pass.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Nothing. The big one for me, I said at the beginning, and this will be the final thing I say on it, is the Hobbiton prophecy is the worst thing this show did, and it should fuck off.
Well, it ties into, you mentioned the Bombadil thing. Everything now has, again, this is the prequel era that we live in, where everything you watch has to exist to remind you of something that's coming down the line. And so everything is imbued with like a mythic weight and status. It's no longer just like the hobbits found a place and built a house. It's like, no, you have to like believe that it is a special place, that it is, you know, important. Tom Bombadil is no longer just a fool who dances round and could easily be removed from the narrative. He has to be the most important character in the history of Middle Earth who you've never met. Like there is this, and you know, it's Rings of Power is just the most obvious example of it, but it is so much modern pop culture of like, well, here, let us explain the backstory of the thing. And like, I think there is something more broadly in pop culture where we don't make, I long for the days when we were like, man, they make so many sequels, because now they just make prequels. Like there's no sense of continuing the story or expanding the story or pushing the boundaries of the story outwards. And I know obviously that's impossible to do in Lord of the Rings, given it ends with the end of Middle Earth. But like even in Star Wars or something like that, there's no sense of like, we're going to go past the sequel trilogy. Instead, it's all like, let's push ourselves as close as we can to the thing that you recognize, and let's just keep pointing towards the thing that you recognize and imbuing it with more meaning and more weight, so that even if you're not enjoying the thing you're watching right now, the thing you're watching right now is telling you how important the thing that you love is. And it's this kind of sense of like, well, do you want your entertainment to flatter you? Do you need like Amazon to spend $1 billion to tell you that Lord of the Rings is good? I don't know.
It's like, I found all of that stuff super derivative, and I know you guys have mentioned it, but I haven't like asked your specific temperature on it. Marty, you said you liked the Grand Elf thing. You found it dumb, but like you kind of liked it. When it makes these references that you notice, do you enjoy it, or are you rolling your eyes?
No. I roll my eyes every time. The Grand Elf one gets a pass because it's so dumb. But no, every time there's a reference to Lord of the Rings, I just think, what if I was just watching Lord of the Rings instead, which are great, and I watch them every year. And that's why I notice all these references, because there's like specific turns of phrases, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what Gandalf says to Frodo in the Mines of Moria, or yes, that's the way Elrond describes something when he goes to Rivendell. Like, that does nothing for me. It does nothing for me in this. Does nothing for me, especially in Star Wars. Like, even when Star Wars is like, don't worry, the Acolyte, it's going to take place so long ago, there's not going to be any connections, and the last shot is fucking Yoda. Like, son of a bitch, how'd that guy get there?
It's just,
now tell me how Yoda got his name.
It just comes back for me.
It's his son was greeting him casually one morning, and it really stuck.
No,
Yoda. Sorry,
he didn't have a name until he had a son.
I just don't understand who Rings of Power is for. I don't think it's for general audiences, because I don't think it's tight enough for the general audience to get it, and I don't think it's for diehard fans because it's just either derivative or doing its references wrong. So who is this for? It's a lot of money to not please most people.
Yeah. It's for Jeff Bezos, who wanted a game. Like that is it. That is the famous story of the origin of the Rings of Power. Is Bezos, I have to imagine, sitting at a long dinner table, banging his knife and fork, saying, "Bring me Game of Thrones." That's the quote that I believe was in Business Insider. "Bring me Game of Thrones." And it's like, well, we have enough money, we can just buy most of Lord of the Rings. And
most of. God damn it.
And like, I should be clear, I don't hate this show. Like, I feel like I've been very negative about it.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
I don't hate it.
Yeah. Like, it's like, I will have forgotten that it existed. Like, that's the question about hate watching, which is I generally don't watch things I hate. And I will say, one of the great things about moving away from the old company is that I no longer feel the obligation to watch things that I hate in order to write about them. I mostly now write about things that I either enjoy or I'm fascinated by, which is great.
Especially a TV series, because a movie, it's like one of those things, well, if I didn't like it, it's 90 minutes. And I can walk out of it.
I never have to watch Joker Folie à Deux again, you know?
But I'm not setting my timer every Sunday night. I got to tune in so my blood pressure can raise. Like, just don't watch it. I don't know. Unless you're like, I don't know, connected to it for some reason, like we are.
There are. I've been getting like shows like for Halloween from streaming services, and like the worst feeling in the world is like watching the first episode of an 8-episode streaming show, which I can't mention because it's under embargo, and it's an hour long, and at the end of it, you're like, that was not good, and then you're like, 7 more to go, baby. It's the worst feeling in the world.
It's like your workday starting off really badly.
Yeah,
and you have to keep doing it
like a Monday. Like Monday 9 a.m. You're like, this week's gonna be fucking bad.
Oh fuck!
I can feel it. Uh, no, I was going to say, speaking of that, do we want to chat a little bit about the other stuff, non Rings of Power things we've been watching? This month of October.
Good media.
Good media. Good media. Yeah, I've
None of it's good.
some of it's good. I had a good week at the theaters over the weekend. I saw two things that I enjoyed to varying degrees. One was Saturday Night, the new movie by Jason Reitman that it tells the 90 minutes leading up to showtime of the very first episode of Saturday Night Live 49 years ago. I believe it was in October of 75. And so this, cast, it's an incredible cast of really talented young actors playing everyone from Lorne Michaels to Chevy Chase to Gilda Radner to John Belushi. I always get worried about Belushi that I'm going to say Jim Belushi.
John and Jim, yeah.
Yeah, I always get worried. A real grand
isn't in K9, yeah, to be fair.
Exactly. But it's the movie, it moves with a really great sort of jazzy breakneck speed. It's pretty much in real time of the 90 minutes leading up to the show, which it's easy to laugh at, like to point at SNL and feel like it's just beating a dead horse now. But like at the time, it was like genuine like counterculture adapted into television in a way that just hadn't been done before, especially a group of like kind of avant-garde weirdo Canadian and Chicago comedians like really trying to deliver something for the youth, in contrast to like someone like fucking Milton Berle who was on TV, or even Carson at the time. The movie feels like an episode of Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, which I liked. It's saccharine Aaron Sorkin garbage, but I like that flavor of garbage. And obviously this wasn't written by Aaron Sorkin, but it is very much modeled after that, to the point where like they compare
is important, Marty, like is what we're doing important.
They compare it to like Prometheus, like we are modern day Prometheus by airing this show. The cast is likable enough and the movie is 90 minutes and moves at a quick enough pace to where I really enjoyed it in theaters. Did not really think about it after I left, so it's not going to stick with me. I don't think this is going to be an Oscar contender, but some really great performances. The guy who played Spielberg in The Fabelmans plays Lorne Michaels, and then the guy that got to play Chevy Chase is phenomenal, like shockingly good at Chevy Chase.
And two Nicholas Braun performances. He's Jim Henson
and Andy Kaufman.
Wow.
Yeah, which
is an Andy Kaufman-esque bit. Yeah.
Matthew Rhys as George Carlin, who was the host of the first episode.
Willem Dafoe as the network, I believe.
Yeah, he plays the evil network executive whose like finger is on. He can like cancel the show at any second and just air a rerun of Carson.
He's not Willem Defriend. He's Willem. He's
absolute Willem Dafoe in this. Even though on a podcast I was listening to, they said that guy is a real network executive and that he was a huge ally of the show at the time. And so I'm like, imagine that guy is like, I fought for this show. Why are you turning me into like the bad
holy
guy?
shit? Yeah.
Like imagine taking your whole family. It's like we're gonna see what Grandpa did, the huge important role that Grandpa played in getting Saturday Night Live on the air.
Like, why does he just feel like the crusty old dean who's trying to shut down the rec center?
Not Grandpa Joe. He's now Grandpa Foe.
Oh,
nice.
Willem Dafoe. But yeah, that's came out here in the States. If you have any interest in SNL or those sort of like real-time workplace process movies, check that out. And then I also saw, did it not come out in Ireland yet?
No, again, like you have to keep in mind, I have never watched an episode of Saturday Night Live. It's just not a thing over here. I'm aware of it through osmosis.
Same here.
Yeah.
So it's like I am looking forward to it, but I am like the one person in Ireland who knows what this is. When I go on radio to talk about this, I'm going to have to begin with. So before we begin, there is a TV show that airs on Saturday night in the States that's called Saturday Night Live. It is a live comedy show. I will have to explain the concept of the show before I explain the concept of the movie exploring the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Again, like for all that I loathe like Ghostbusters Afterlife, Reitman is a director that I like have a soft spot for. I do think Up in the Air is great. I think Juno hasn't necessarily aged wonderfully, but is like well made.
College,
I think,
good soundtrack.
Tully is massively underrated.
I like Tully a lot.
Yeah. Like I like Reitman. If he with the right material, I think Reitman is the right man. You know,
that's how he got his name.
Grandpa Reitman.
No.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe was standing around set one day going, "Isn't that right, man?" And goes, "Yeah, yes, it is."
I got a name.
The SNL prophecy.
And then the SNL prophecy. Uh,
We will build it here in Rockefeller.
inside the rolling hills of Manhattan. And then I also saw it was only like a 2-day limited release, but Look Back, which is an anime movie that is based on a one-shot manga from Tetsuki Fujimoto, who would go on to create Chainsaw Man. It is the opposite of Chainsaw Man, though, whereas Chainsaw Man is just terrifying and violent and hedonistic and wonderful. This is about almost like a semi-biographical story of a mangaka, a manga creator. Just like a really sweet, really beautiful movie about art and creation and passion and yeah, really, I was really glad I got to see it in theaters because it was only in screens for 2 days. I'm like, why are you only in theaters 2 days? What if you put them in the rest of the days? What if we removed some of these Terrifier 3 screenings and you put something nice like Look Back?
I think, look, it's very easy to say that with hindsight. Looking back, it's very easy to know what to do.
Did you see Terrifier? Did you watch all the Terrifiers?
I did. I watched all the Terrifiers for my sins.
I've seen 1 and 2. I've seen 1 and 2. I can't drag myself to go to the theater and sit in a dark room to watch 3. I'll watch it. It's
a very weird energy. I did see it at a surprise screening. The audience didn't know what they were getting, and
it seems like a bad movie to surprise people with.
It's very interesting because when the lights went down, the room was about 40% women, and when the lights came up, it was something like 95% men. It was very strange, but no, not a big fan of the Terrifier franchise. I get what they're doing. It's nice. It's nice, he says, but the practical effects are impressive. The fact that they're indie films that have succeeded is good and laudable. And I do think that art is a memorable character design. But there's a monkey paw that kind of curdles when I watched the first movie, and the first movie is basically a special effects reel. It's basically Damien Leone, the director, showing off what he can do, and I'm like, but what is this? What is this in service of? What is the point of this? And the monkey paw curls, and then Terrifier 2 is a 2-hour and 20-minute slasher movie about an existential battle between good and evil, in which Art the Clown is the representation of all that is evil in the world, while our hero is a warrior angel, presumably sent by God, in order to strike him off Earth. And as you watch the movies, they take on this weird, I love that Jay is Jay, this is the mythology of Terrifier. But there's a proper Gibsonian energy to these movies, which is the idea of the flesh will be rend from your bones, that there will be suffering and agony and blood and gore and guts, and through that there will be some sort of spiritual purification. Except, of course, because it's Gibsonian, the pleasure is in the pain. As an audience member, you're meant to kind of sit there and laugh at the suffering and the gore and the graphic detail, while the film itself is isn't it horrible what's happening here? It's a very strange energy that doesn't work for me, and I know it works for a lot of other people, but it's not. I just find them I find the first one vapid, and then I find the second two really insistent on themselves, where there's large gory sequences that are excessive to the point of just being excessive, and then there are long stretches of dialogue, mythology, and backstory that just do not engage me whatsoever, and I'm please let me go back to the horrible torture stuff, because that's kind of a relief.
It is very wild that these movies keep getting longer. What are we doing?
No, the third one is shorter. He trimmed it's 15 minutes shorter for the third one.
Okay,
it's
still over 2 hours.
Minutes.
No, you
it's
can't.
2 hours and 5 minutes.
Tight 90 was built for horror and comedy. Tight 90s.
But also art uses guns and bombs. Art is a slasher. Again, this is me being a JMA kind of JMA getting you getting possessed of Tolkien lore, where I'm it shouldn't bother me, and it's not an issue if it were if the movie worked for me, this wouldn't bother me at all. But the fact that this is it's a pure slasher movie, it's we're stripping it, it feels in some ways like a reaction against elevated horror, but by being a reaction against elevated horror, it's ultimately a vindication of elevated horror, because it's movies that are consciously trying to say nothing, which becomes a statement of themselves in a weird paradoxical sort of way. But much as these movies try to be quote unquote pure slasher movies, Art routinely produces guns and machine guns and pipe bombs, and I'm what is the energy here? Why am I and not to be the I can't believe the killer clown gets away with this, or what are the laws of magic that govern this? But I'm why do I care? if the killer, when he's wounded, can just produce a gun out of nowhere and kill the hero, why am I invested in what's happening?
Yeah.
If this guy who like stabs people through houses can also produce dozens of pipe bombs that will explode and kill dozens of people, why do I care about seeing him stalk through a house and murder a family? I don't know. I feel like I'm being overly whiny about a movie that I don't hate that much, but I also just don't get anything from.
It's just, it's also very much a one-trick pony of like especially in the first movie, like it is.
Oh yeah.
So these movies, I guess, for people who don't know, extremely low budget and the hyper violent, like, and the camera lingers on the gore, and it's not just, oh, he went into a woman's taking a shower and he goes in and murders her. It's he murders her over the course of a 10-minute scene and peels her face off, and like it's just like extreme gore, which there is
in graphic detail, and there's like intestines,
and there is
like there's
clearly an audience for it, because the movie, which cost like $2 million to make, the third one released, and it made $20 million in the US this weekend. It made more than the Joker did on its second weekend. Like, this movie is a massive
a real killer clown, if you will.
A real killer clown. It is an indie sensation, like, genuinely at the box office. And so that is, as much as I do not care about these movies at all, I'm always going to be like, hell yeah, an indie movie made a shit ton of money. That's cool.
And like, to give credit where it's due, like, because I feel like I've been very harsh about it. Like, you can see Leone is like invested in what he's doing, and he's having conversations. So like, there was criticism of the first two Terrifier movies for their treatment of women, and that is kind of what I was alluding to when I was like, lights go down 40% women, lights come up 5% women. But like, there is like, it's very graphic, and a lot of the violence is directed towards women. And I don't think it's misogyny. It's just like, he's emulating 80s slasher movies, which just absorb background like misogyny and doesn't like interrogate in any meaningful way. But to his credit, like, he seems to have heard this criticism, and there's an extended sequence in the third movie that is recreating a famous kill from the first movie, except this time he's doing it to a guy, because that's feminist, you see. That's and I'm like, I kind of admire that you're in that level of weird dialogue about your gore horror movie. Like, I like that you are clearly internalizing and thinking about this stuff, but also that's not the solution to the problem that you're facing. And I do want to say, before I end, like, just one thing nice to say about Terrifier 3. One thing I did genuinely love. There was a moment where I did smile, and like, I gave the movie credit for what it was doing, which is when it's obviously an homage to classic slasher movies. It manages to do like the 3 core pre-Halloween slasher movies in one set piece. It does Black Christmas, Psycho, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the same sequence. And I'm like, that is actually artful. That is like actually clever and thoughtful and engaged with the source material in a way that I don't know the rest of the movie is. And I so to give praise where it's due, it clearly does come from a place of love for the genre and the material.
Yeah, and to show how big this has gotten, you can buy an Art the Clown skin in Call of Duty multiplayer. Like, that's how big this franchise has gotten, which is just very strange. Also, the fact that in interviews he keeps being, I think I got lore for 2 more movies. I'm like, what if you don't? What if you just make something else? Do we need 5 of these fuckers?
Look, like, this is the thing. It's like, where does Art go? Like, at the moment, Art is riding high, and people are like, oh, he's a new horror icon, like Ghostface, or like Jason, or like Michael Myers. And it's like, let's maybe give it a little while. Let's maybe see how much mileage Art the Clown has in the tank before we start raving about this.
Yeah.
You know, I think he's currently at like Pumpkinhead level. Like, that's where I think he's at. He's at Pumpkinhead. Like, that's where he's at now. Give him a couple of years and we'll talk about it, you know?
Yeah.
You watch anything else, Darren?
I think we both watched It's What's Inside, and I just want to shout out, it's great fun. It's on Netflix, so it's easily watchable. Just a wonderful high concept movie. It has this incredible premise, which I don't want to spoil. It feels like a movie that I saw blind. I
watched the trailer, and I don't want people to watch the trailer. I just want people to watch the movie.
The movie, yeah. Because it's such a great premise, and it's one of those things where it's like, I want to see 10 different movies that use this premise as their starting point. They don't have to be the same genre. They don't have to be the same style. They just, like, there's an idea in this movie that I feel like you could do 10 or 15 different ways and make a great movie out of. I think this is wonderful. I also think it's just wonderfully well made. It has some of the best exposition I have ever seen. We were talking about like Rings of Power, but there are like moments where characters are just dumping extended backstory, and it's delivered in a way that is like playful and fun and exciting and inventive. And the gimmick that we mentioned forces the movie to be visually inventive. It has to be very clever about how it conveys information to you visually, which gives it a very strong visual style, even though it is mostly set in a confined single space. I had a really good time with it. I really did.
People asking what genre it is. It's
thriller,
light sci-fi, very light horror thriller, but like not super gory and not like super like jump scares or anything. It is more when you get to what the premise of the movie is, you're like, oh, I get this. Kind of feels like it could be like an extended Twilight Zone episode. It reminded me a little bit of two things. It reminded me a little bit of Bodies.
Yes, because they're all in the house and they're all gathered together, and it's a reunion of old friends, and it's very hip and modern. Yeah, and
it reminded me of the Panos Cosmatos episode of
the Curiosity.
Yeah, The Viewing, I think it was called. In that sort, even like the thing has that retro sci-fi look to it.
Yeah, like, and it's strong like lighting choices. Of like blue and red and stuff. And by the way, if you haven't seen The Viewing's incredible. More like that. We talk about concepts that more people should be doing stuff with. Space cocaine. Like more movies should have space cocaine in them.
Think about it. Elf cocaine is the next big one.
Yeah. Oh my God. Take a movie and say like, if you added space cocaine to it, would be better. Like, so like Barty, Saturday night, if I added space cocaine to that.
There was so much space cocaine in that writer's room already. I don't think you need to give Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi space cocaine.
I can't wait. I can't wait for a hobbit to walk past me and say, "See you later, crack elf."
That was a really good impression. What were the names?
Why do you think that's a good? They're from the region where I live. Definitely. What about like they are?
Wait, what was the name
accent?
Of the
is my regional accent.
What were the names of the different tribe they found? The Snoots.
The Irrelevance, I think they were
Spruits. They had a silly name, but I liked it.
They're not appearing in this movie.
Classic Scroots.
And then the other one is like I saw Wild Robot and I liked Wild Robot. It's incredibly well made. It's just beautifully animated. Like I love the animation style where it looks like a painting. It is incredibly moving. Only real problem I have is that it's a movie that has like 4 separate endings. Yeah. Like you get to a certain points in the narrative and you're like, okay, movie's over. Or maybe movie's over and we'll jump to like forward in time and there'll be a nice coda to it. But it just kind of keeps going and has like these false endings, which always involve action scenes. That, and to be fair, they hit the emotional mark, so I don't complain too much. But it does always feel like I have my hands on the 2 sides of my cinema chair and I'm ready to get up. And the movie's like, oh, no, you don't. There's another 20 minutes for you. Which isn't the worst problem in the world if it's done well. But I did find it very disconcerting.
Okay. Then you also, before we get to Jay, you wrote down you're watching a bunch of David Lynch stuff.
I was. I've just been watching.
Is there for a reason or just because his stuff rules?
The podcast Blank Check, which I listen to, is doing a Lynch season, and it's just like I figured it had been like it's been years since I've watched Lynch stuff. And like Lynch is he's not one of my guys. He's not like you don't really sit down, put your feet up, and go, you know what? Oh, really? Like clear the head.
He's not one of your top 3 things.
Head. Yeah, he's not one of my top 3. It's not like, after a hard day at work, I crack open a can of brewskis and I'm like, you know what, Blue Velvet.
I do that with Firewalk with
me.
What?
Do you know what helps me unwind?
Really?
Yeah. Firewalk with me unwind.
Yeah.
Really?
That is a movie I just put on in the background to just soak in the vibes, and it is a nightmare.
Yeah, there's lots of unintelligible screaming.
I will do laundry and household chores to the nightmare cries of Firewalk with Me. I love
Marty, this explains a lot.
Grandolph.
To be clear, like Firewalk with Me is a story of a young woman's degeneration into madness, degradation, and eventually suicide resulting from an incestuous relationship. And I think Marty's like, yeah, just fold close to it. It's just his vibe.
That's how you do a prequel. Didn't tell me how Twin Peaks got its name. I don't give a shit how that's how it got its name.
Like that is what I was thinking about actually. Like for all that, like because it's weird to like the sharp pivot of going from the unreserved fan service of like Rings of Power to like Firewalk with Me, where the entire premise of it is, what if like this small, beautiful town that you love, this quaint little TV show populated by all its quirky characters, was actually just a nightmare treadmill of suffering and incest and violence and murder. It is like fan disservice. It is so stunning. It is
And I
so
love it
aggressive
because of that. Yeah.
What if David Bowie ran in for a couple of seconds and then just disappeared?
And
You're like,
said,
what happened to Bowie?
We're not going to talk about Judy, and then doesn't talk about Judy. Like that's good setup and payoff. He says he's not going to talk about her, and they don't talk about her.
It's all a dream.
It's above a convenience store. I love, by the way, that like Bowie apparently was asked, because obviously he had cancer at the time they were making the return, and they did ask whether he wanted to come back and do a voiceover performance. And he was like, "No, just hire an actor from New Orleans." Yeah. I feel like I didn't quite nail the New Orleans accent if I'd had a little more time. But yeah, just like watching Lynch stuff, like revisiting Twin Peaks. I think Twin Peaks is probably his masterpiece for all the show's flaws. Like that is the grand work that will unify like all of Lynch's filmography. But yeah, just having a good, the straight story. The straight story is lovely.
The fact that he has that like pitch, it's like he's like, yeah, I could do something that's like beautiful and heartfelt and like a family movie, and you're like, oh, you're great at it too.
A G-rated movie, like a G-rated, like, and I love that Lynch is like, it's my most experimental movie, a G-rated Disney film. But like, yeah, even stuff like, say, like The Elephant Man, which I had not seen since I was a teenager, and made me cry like a baby. Like it's such a beautiful, sweet film, and for all we think of Lynch as the weird guy, like watching Lynch's films so close together and so back to back, it's like he's a guy who really feels things. Like his movies aren't about like logical or rational things. They aren't about lore, for all that like you have Wikipedia articles about Twin Peaks. They're about like Lynch processing the way that things make him feel. And so when you're watching them, I don't have the critical divide of going, well, obviously when the little man appears and dances, that symbolizes, that's a metaphor for the American exceptionalist experience, because it's not. It's just an image that appeared to David Lynch and made him feel a particular way. And so as a critic, I go, how does that make me feel? And it kind of just bypasses so much of like how I watch so much other stuff. And it hits me like a ton of bricks. It's incredibly effective. Like Firewall's broke.
Speaking of DVDs earlier, when Mulholland Drive famously had like the one sheet of like, here's all the clues for if you want to figure out Mulholland Drive from David Lynch, here are 10 clues. And it was
every time a lamp appears.
And it's like complete bullshit. Like the clues are complete and utter bullshit. Also, the movie didn't have chapter.
Yeah.
The movie doesn't have chapters. So you can't just be like, I want to watch the scene where the girls kiss. It's like, no, you can't. You got to start the movie and then fast forward there.
There's the straight story DVD. When you open it, comes with a note from David Lynch saying that a movie is not a book. You cannot skip to chapters. It should be experienced like life. And I'm like, that is just king behavior. Like that is like, that is just like total ownership of your work unapologetically. And like the amount of like, and again, you're watching even back in Twin Peaks when Twin Peaks was on television. I don't know if you guys have watched like the Twin Peaks TV show, but like there are moments in that are so deliberately trolling of the audience. Like episode 3 ends with Cooper waking up, picking up the phone and going, I want to meet you in the morning. I know who killed Laura Palmer. And then in the following episode, he's like, oh, I completely forgot. Sorry, it just slipped out of my head. And like the second season premiere has like, is it like a 10-minute sequence where Cooper is lying on the ground bleeding out from like a gunshot wound, and the world's slowest room service attendant comes in to see him, goes to leave, stops halfway, turns around and realizes he needs to ask more questions. It is like so deliberately trolling of like the audience's expectations. And I kind of love it so much. It like, I have a great deal of affection, particularly like in an industry that is now so fan-centric, that like Lynch is just like, well, it interests me. You know?
That's all that really matters.
I had my fun. Like,
I love it.
I get to be on Twin Peaks and hang around with people. Like Twin Peaks: The Return, where like Lynch as Cole is like, I had the dream about Monica Bellucci last night, and it's like, David, did you just write that so that you could be in a scene with Monica Bellucci? And it's like, probably.
To be fair, Tim Burton does the same thing. So
fair.
A couple of wild-haired men just living their dreams. Jay, what about you? What have you been watching?
I've been on a real October spooky horror fest, not just in games, but also TV. I've been watching a lot of old horror movies that kind of I watched when I was younger. I recently just finished Return of the Living Dead, which is a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
Absolutely adore it. I think it might be my favorite zombie movie of all time. The way it manages and contextualizes zombies, I absolutely adore. I also watched some shit, namely Jeepers Creepers, which is worse than I remember it being when I was younger. I don't know if I've told you guys like my experience with horror movies in general. So I started watching horror movies when I was very young, namely because my mum's friend had collected DVDs and had a wall, like a video store wall of DVDs. And every time we went to visit, he would allow me to take like as many as I could carry. And it was like a treat for me to go visit. And one day, I went and I pretended to take, I think it was Friday the 13th or something, like a horror movie. And I looked at my mum, and she was like, yeah, okay. So I took Friday the 13th, all of them, all of the Friday the 13th movies, all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and all of the Halloween movies, and I watched them all in the same week. And it just, we're talking about foundational moments. This was like horror, like just became one of my things. So yeah, I've just been trying to delve into a lot of those. Saying that, I watched Silence of the Lambs last night. Oh my god!
Oh yeah.
Forgot how good that is.
One of the best movies ever made. Like it's
but I haven't seen it since I was a teenager. So wow, having context and have lived life, that movie changes a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty good. And on a less serious note, I've been watching a show with someone on. I'm interested to see how many viewers know about this show. It's called it's on Shudder. It's called Dragula. So this is
is that the drag show?
It's a drag show. Yeah, it's a horror themed drag show. Where it's kind of like RuPaul's Drag Race, but it's more horror themed, and they have like horrible challenges and stuff. Super entertaining, like super entertaining. The drama, the costumes, the artistry of it. I absolutely love it. So big shout out to Dragula.
Does Rob Zombie ever pop up?
A zombie? I think
Rob Zombie.
Rob Zombie. I haven't seen Rob Zombie yet. No, but they do have celebrity guests. But it's so good. I absolutely love it, and they've got a new season out. And also like I just think supporting Shudder, supporting horror generation is just really good. So go watch your horror movies. Go sharing that. It's great.
Speaking of zombie movies, have either of you guys seen? This was a Japanese movie from I think 2018, something like that, called One Cut of the Dead.
No, but I've heard of it.
It's its premise is that a movie crew goes to this abandoned spooky abandoned building that's supposedly haunted to film a horror movie, and they are attacked by zombies. But that is not what the movie is about, and I'm not going to say what the movie's about. But that is what the first 10 minutes of the movie is about. But the movie is so smart and so fun, and if you like the story of making movies, I highly recommend One Cut of the Dead. And again, much like It's What's Inside, not watching a trailer to kind of get spoiled of like what the movie.
This was advertised to me while I was browsing movies yesterday.
Yeah, I think it's on. Now. It might be on Shudder or AMC Plus or something. It's definitely
Shudder,
whenever I open up like Amazon, it kind of pops up there. But One Cut of the Dead.
So it's a cut above, is what you're saying.
Yeah. It is absolutely a cut above. Yeah, just one cut though. It's a singular cut above. Excellent. Then before we wrap up, a couple of super chats that came in. Sussy Guru with a €5 dono. Thank you so much. They should make a Star Trek version of Lord of the Rings. Elves are Vulcans. Orcs are Klingons. Hobbits are Tellarites. I don't even know what those are. Imagine Bilbo swearing all the time. What are Tellarites?
Tellarites are the pig people. They're the people who will always argue. They're defining character. Like, this is one of the things about Star Trek, and stop me if I get too nerdy, but there's an early episode of Star Trek in which Spock's father is introduced, and he's doing a trade negotiation with the Tellarites. The Tellarites are the pig people. And at one point, Spock's father makes a comment that in any other circumstance about any other ethnic group would be horribly racist. Where it's like, you might as well just not fucking talk to Tellarites. It's like they argue for the sake of arguing, these people. And like in any other circumstance, like if it were like a British ambassador talking about an Irish ambassador, it would be horribly racist. But because Star Trek is Star Trek, and because we love Spock's dad, it turns out that we extrapolated the entire characterization of Tellarites to be no. Spock's dad wasn't being racist. He was just making a statement of fact. Tellarites really like arguing. That is their entire culture.
Wow.
It's just one of those great little world building things where it's like somebody watched that at too young an age, didn't get that like the whole point was Spock's father's a dick, and was like, no, Spock's dad is a good guy. He wouldn't say anything unless it were true. Therefore, there's an entire race in Star Trek whose shtick is they like arguing. Those are the
Oh
Tellarites.
my god.
Just a fucking actually
guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And I like the Tellarites. It's a really fun design. Google it if you want. Like, it's a really great 60s design. They pop up in the later seasons of Enterprise. They're quite good as well. Like, and I think they've now got like tusks like pigs, like warthog tusks.
They're just turning into like Ugnaughts from Star
And
Wars.
the makeup gets more advanced. Like, they're a real like, what more can we do with these people?
I don't like their beards. Their beards freak me out.
It's great.
Yeah.
I love them so much. But yeah, like, and to be fair, didn't like Nimoy record some of Tolkien's songs? And again, I may refer to Jay on this one.
Bilbo
Baggins.
Yeah.
He's only 3 feet tall.
And it's also like not a stretch to connect like the 1960s embrace of the counterculture of Lord of the Rings, which obviously Tolkien, as far as I know, I'll defer to Jay on this, but I think Tolkien was kind of bemused and slightly confused by these kind of like pot smoking hippies being like, yeah, the hobbits, that's where it's at. But like it does make sense that you look at like Star Trek, and Star Trek has the Vulcans who, as you say, are elf-like, but also have like ESP powers, and particularly like in the classic Star Trek, they have like extrasensory perception and like telekinesis and things like that the later like 90s like your dad's Star Trek kind of toned down a little bit, but like in the 60s it's like, no, Spock can feel the universe die. It's
so metal.
It's not a coincidence. It is, I think, part of the same kind of cultural stew.
100%.
You know who was a great recent pig creature in pop culture? The Nick Nolte character in The Mandalorian season 1. Wasn't he like a little pig who like rode the thing? And what did he say? Like, I've spoken or whatever?
I've spoken, yeah.
Yeah. It's great. Shout out to Nick Nolte.
Great.
I hope, speaking of cocaine, speaking of space cocaine. George Lucas with a €2 dono. Thank you so much, George Lucas. Spooky movie talk. The 2016 film Raw by Julia Dockernau. I believe Dockernau is how you pronounce her name. I've seen Raw and I've seen
Titania.
That was the one about a couple of car fuckers.
Okay, I was going to be coy about what that film was about, but yes, it is. It's
that and Crash. 2 movies about a couple of
Crash. Yeah, it's like, what if David Cronenberg's Crash was too subtle? Is basically what Titania is.
Yeah.
Like, it's fascinating that like you have this again. It's the new French wave, or the new French extreme, where like you have like during the 2000s, you have like French directors and European directors pushing like gore. And a lot of that influences like the American wave of remakes of 70s horrors, like say The Hills of Eyes or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and things like that. Whereas like I love that you now have like a post wave of that, which is what if women like were more interested in body horror, and it gets you things like Raw, it gets you things like Titania, it also gets you things like The Substance.
Did you mean two people who like to fuck in cars, or people like to fuck cars?
So
have you seen The Counselor? Have you seen Ridley Scott's The Counselor?
No.
Okay, this is going to be a lot tougher to explain. Marty clearly has seen.
I love it.
There's a scene in The Counselor where like Javier Bardem is sitting down to have a conversation with Michael Fassbender, which is very similar to the conversation we're about to have with you, which is like he's talking about like a night out with Cameron Diaz, and he's like, so we were getting busy, and then at one stage she started to fuck the car. And like Michael Fassbender's like, so you two fucked in the car is what you're telling me. He's like, no. Let me explain in graphic detail. She climbed on top of the car, and she pulled down her pants, and she pulled up her skirt, and she like straddled the car itself. And like as this is happening, you just see the reactions of Javier Bardem seeing what is happening, and the reaction of Michael Fassbender reacting to being told what Javier Bardem has seen is happening. And that is like, Titania is just like, but what if we actually did that? Like, what if we followed that idea to its logical conclusion?
And did you like this movie?
I think it's pretty good. Yeah,
It's pretty good.
I think it's pretty good. Yeah.
I love art.
Yeah.
Art is great.
It won the Palme d'Or.
But it screened a Cannes. Did it win the Palme d'Or?
I think it might have. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
oh yeah, that's what. Yeah, we were talking about The Substance had a chance of winning, but we were like, After that,
once the doors open. Yeah. Where's the movie Crash? Not the one that won the Oscar.
That was a COVID win as well. I think is like one of
everyone
the things that
through a
explains
COVID fog was like, just give it to the car fucking movie.
Like, what movies do you remember from this year's Cannes film?
It was either this or Sonic the Hedgehog.
It's memorable. It's memorable.
Great. I think oh no, we still got one more. And that leads us perfectly into our little finale. Darwin's Dummy with a $5 dono. Thank you so much. Loved the new backdrop. Then I checked the comments. Darren, you sure kicked a hornet's nest of angry fans. Don't let them get you down. Darren, I think your new backdrop is delightful, and I highly recommend everyone watching it as soon as this is done.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to shout out, like, it was Nick who kind of like, I have thoughts about this sort of stuff, but I generally keep it to myself because, as you said, kicking a hornet's nest, like sharing those sorts of opinions on an online space doesn't lend itself to nuanced discussion. But yeah, no, Nick basically said, look, after seeing the Variety report 2 weeks ago now about like how studios are reacting to fan pressure, we should talk about that. And fair play to Nick for like backing me on that, and like a wonderful edit from Jesse. Like Omar and Jesse, whenever I throw an idea out there and I see what they do, I am just like blown away because it's like coherent and it makes sense and it's logical, and I'm like, none of that came from me. So it's like, I'm very proud of that episode. I think it's a good episode. I also think it is like the coldest, like the coldest possible opinion that you could have about like fandom, where I'm like, yes, major franchises are in bad water. Yes, there are very real problems with how these projects are made. Yes, the modern media landscape is awful, but also we need to talk about the behavior of fans. And like, then the immediate response is, so you're taking the side of the large faceless corporations. And it's like, trust me, I don't think Warner Brothers consider me an ally. I don't think the guys at the Walt Disney Company are like, well, Darren, he's a good one.
Amazon didn't watch this episode and was like, finally, we have our 3 white knights.
He gets it. The Amazon executive's like, Hobbit ton ? But yeah, no, I'm very proud of how it turned out. I think it turned out reasonably well. Like, yeah, it is a statement that it's something I've been wanting to say, and something that I'm glad I got the opportunity to say. And next 2 weeks from now, I'll say something much more banal and gentle, and that's controversial.
Banal and gentle. I love it. Perfect. Yeah, and then obviously you have your 3 times a week columns that go out usually on Friday, Sunday, and Monday. Those go out to folks who are at the Patreon at the $5 tier or above, and then we occasionally make a freebie if we think it's one that, I think the Joker one was the last one, and then I'll probably make that. You have another for folks who may have liked your Hickman X-Men deep dive from a couple months ago. I think the end of the summer. You have another comics based one that will be running on a quiet weekend that we'll make that a public one as well, because I think your comics writing, you don't get to do it a ton for us, but I think is always phenomenal, and it's something that's definitely that's the medium I know the least about of anything that we produce here that I edit, and so being able to learn a little bit from those is always wonderful.
No, it's delightful. It is about Rom V's recent Detective Comics run, which is, for my money, one of the best Batman runs in years, one of the best Detective Comic runs in over a decade, and is, I think, a really great take on like Batman and superheroes, and is well worth a read. And yeah, so this weekend, I know that on Monday I'll be talking about the 3rd episode of the TV show The Franchise on HBO. On Friday, I will probably be talking about Smile 2, maybe. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet, so I might not.
It's like a lot better than the first one.
I hear the performance. I've heard like her performance is absolutely incredible, which is stunning. So I'm very excited to see it. There is like the premiere is taking place right now. I unfortunately have to miss it, but I will be going to another screening tomorrow. So
so they've been for Smile. They've been doing the viral marketing of they'll put like someone smiling at like a baseball game or like in the audience of something. So they had them behind the World Series, which is baseball championships happening here in the States, and they had the 2 Smile, the guy and the girl, sitting like right behind home plate, so you could see them the entire game just staring at the camera, smiling smiling.
Amazing.
Someone hit a pop foul ball right beforehand, and the smile guy breaks because he's afraid his ball's going to go and hit him.
I
And so
want
he
to see
breaks.
this clip so
He's like,
bad.
and then has to go back to be like, "Oh shit, I'm smiling." And so I like wonder if like he had to go back to Smile HQ afterwards, and they like stripped his badge. Like, we'll need your smile badge and your gun away.
Yeah, like,
after
do
this
you
one.
get a bonus? Like, if he showed up with a massive, like, baseball-shaped, like, lesion on his head with the smile still on his face,
Yeah,
does he get,
exactly.
like, employee of the month? I also love the idea of there being a wall of people with the smile in, like, Smile HQ.
Here, I'm gonna put a link to. I think someone clipped it. I'm putting it here in the chat if anyone wants.
Ooh.
The man get very scared.
If you want to smile this
If
evening.
you want to smile, the guy in yellow gets very scared. So yeah, check that out. Jay, what do you got going on?
In a few days, I've got my episode on Silent Hill 2 remake coming out, talking
Yes.
about what it is to remake a game and how changing something as simple as how the camera controls can completely make or break an experience and have these cascading effects on having to change the rest of the game. Spoilers, I did not like the remake as much. So yeah, that'll be coming out. An episode of DevHeads came out last week, and we've got a bunch of streams. We've got Resi 7 on Thursday.
Same time as this pod on Thursday will be Resi 7, and then I think same time as this pod on Friday, you guys will be doing Night in the Woods.
Yes, we're doing Night in the Woods on Friday, and then on Sunday, me and Jesse will be continuing Obscure.
Yeah, at 11 a.m.
So yeah, lots of streams, lots of videos, lots of content. Lucky bunch, you guys.
The Big C, as folks call it. No one, I don't think anyone's ever called it the Big C.
Yeah, I feel like the Big C is something else. Like, there was a while, like, my siblings work in medicine, and there was a while where we weren't sure what the Big C was.
Yeah.
Conte was a contested term in the medical community.
Yeah.
Got the Big C. Well, how bad is that?
Hey, but coming up from behind, content. Don't say the Big C coming up from behind. Anyways, we're done. That's the end of the episode of the conversation. So for Jay, for Darren, and for Eric, thank you all so much for tuning in to Rewind episode number 7. We appreciate you all. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your days and afternoons, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.